Long-time listener, first-time writer. I'm a woman in her early 20s working my way through college and trying to come out the other side with as little debt as possible. I've never had a reason to write into you before, but bro, something majorly effed up happened to me last month and I'm thinking, dang, I'm gonna send this into Let's Read. And so I do a bit of this, a bit of that, but one of my hustles is working as an Uber Eats driver when I have spare time from my other jobs or from going to the gym. I always gotta be on that graft, you know what I'm saying, brosif? No, anyways, this one day I get an order that comes up on the app, a McDonald's delivery, and I accept it because I'm nearby. I don't recognize the address, which is odd because I know this town pretty well, but whatever. I took the order, waited longer than usual for the teenage workers to get their thumbs out of their butts and prepare the food, and then off I headed to my delivery location. It turns out it was right at the edge of the perimeter that we're allowed to deliver within, so basically the food was going to be cold as crap when it got there, and still, not my problem, I thought. They ordered it knowing the expected delivery time, and that's what microwaves are for. Now, I only say this because the further I got from the McDonald's, the more run-down and grody the neighborhoods got. We started in a sort of run-down urban area in the first place and then drove through a suburb that looked like it had been cursed by the demon of poverty itself. It kind of looked like the way movies portrayed Detroit when they're trying to emphasize how bad it can be, but also maybe even more abandoned. There was barely any graffiti, which was weird. Like even the criminals and the youth gangs didn't want to hang out in this area, it seemed. And no wonder I'd never heard of the place before. Now, I heard fear being described on a podcast as bone prickles not long ago, and that term struck me as perfect. Driving with this goddamn McDonald's, the smell of fries and Big Macs making me feel kinda sick, I started suffering with the bone prickles. And the moment I heard the guy say that phrase on the podcast, I knew exactly what he meant. It's like when your entire body tingles and prickles thanks to some kind of unspecified fear, and I was feeling this just by driving to the delivery location. Now, eventually I reached this address, and it was on the very edge of some rundown suburbia. Now, if this house had been the only occupied property on the block, I wouldn't have been surprised. The rest of the houses were completely dark, boarded up, and run down. This one house had light spilling out of every window and chill, relaxing music playing loud enough for me to hear as I pulled up to the curb outside. Some kind of pop punk or something kind of fun. Now I manhandled the bag that keeps the food warm, although with how long it had taken to arrive at that location, I didn't have much faith in their fries being hot anymore. Again, everything had fallen within the promised delivery time, so no issues there. I hauled butt up the driveway, surprised at how heavy their food order was, and I knocked. It took a few knocks before the volume of the music inside lowered, and the door was answered by a pretty-looking guy, a very reassuring gentleman. Now, he must have been in his mid-20s, and he was wearing a band tee and had a goofy expression that made me think that he might have been stoned. Now, I explained that I was there to deliver the food, and he yelled back in the house that some chick was here with a McDonald's had anyone ordered any food. I explained that that was a pretty large order, so maybe it was for a bunch of them, and he seemed pretty confused by this. Now, he said that there was only 3 of them in the house, and they'd recently gotten a delivery pizza, so he couldn't really explain who'd ordered the McDonald's. I showed him the app and confirmed 100% that the address was correct, and he asked me to wait on the porch while he went and checked with the rest of the guys, and so I was just stuck standing there while I heard vague noises from within. Muffled voices turned into banging and almost shouting, and I began to feel that bone prickle again. Eventually, this goofy streamer reappeared at the front door. Now remember, I still had the food in the thermal bag at this point, and he apologized profusely, saying he was an idiot and the other guys had ordered McDonald's as well as pizza, and everything was all good. However, just as I started to unzip the bag, he told me to hang on because they wanted to offer me a tip. I told them they could do it through the app and they didn't have to do it at all, but this guy was absolutely adamant that they were going to give me $10 for the trouble, so if I could just wait on the porch again, he'd head inside and get the cash. Now, who even keeps cash around these days, to be honest? Now anyways, this time he left the door open just enough for me to see inside. The front door opened into the living room, and I was kind of impressed how clean and frankly awesome the place looked. They had framed posters on the wall, a couple of pinball tables in the corner, and an expensive-looking flat-screen TV. Now, this didn't seem to be the room that they were hanging out in either, and I sort of nosily peered around to see where my new delivery friend had gone to find my tip. Now, I saw him milling about back and forth past the door to what seemed to be a kitchen, and then calling out down a set of stairs to what looked like a basement. I wondered if they had an even more impressive home theater system down there or something, and I wondered if it was just one of those cases where someone with money buys a house that looks run down from the outside in an abandoned neighborhood area and then just uses the crappy exterior to actually mask a really awesome dwelling. Now still, it was none of my business. Now eventually my new friend came back with $10.69 and I just politely laughed at the obvious joke. Now I finally fished out the huge bags of McDonald's out of the insulated bag, and I could tell already that by now they were cold, and I figured I just wouldn't make mention of it. This guy had kept me on the porch long enough at this point. Now after thanks and some goodbyes, I headed back to my car, got in, and then checked for more jobs. There was another one at the same McDonald's, so I figured why not. It had just come through, so by the time I reached the restaurant, the order should be ready. So I started to drive off. I have one of those reversing cameras in my car, and I admit I rely on it a little bit too much, so my rearview mirror isn't perfectly aligned like it should be. Instead, it lets me view the back seat, something I'd adjusted for it recently when I was taking my niece and nephew out for, ironically, McDonald's. And as such, glancing into the rearview mirror allowed me to notice that there was someone lying on the floor in the back seat. Now, I could tell he was a guy in his mid-20s, and I also could tell that he was holding some kind of weird knife, and I don't know how to describe it. It was clearly some type of kitchen implement, but I'd never seen a knife like that before. And I suddenly realized that the delivery customers had kept me at the door for so long without turning back to my own vehicle that it could have allowed one of them to actually slip inside. Now, I didn't expect to be more than a minute or two, so I didn't lock the car behind me, and now I was regretting that immensely. What the hell did this guy have planned for me? He was just laying there, staring off blankly like he was waiting for something, clutching that kitchen blade. Now, obviously, whatever he had planned was nothing good, and the first thing I did was I decided to do a stop looking in the rearview mirror, and I didn't want him to see that I'd seen him. Now, obviously, this was all happening within a split second. My heart was absolutely pounding, and I was certain that this was how I would die, with my throat slit as I was heading to an Uber Eats delivery. Now up ahead, I saw the lights of a gas station. I kept my speed normal and I didn't allow myself to react at all, and then moments before I reached the turning into the gas station, I shot forward, screeched into the parking lot, leapt out of my car, and then ran into that gas station. Now, I must have sounded like some crazy woman, yelling how a delivery customer stoner McDonald's order guy was hiding in my backseat and had a weird knife, and I didn't know what he had planned, and blah, blah, blah. I was just trying to explain the events and my theory and how I thought the delivery customer had distracted me, and I was almost telling all of this at once. Now, the clerk, an older man, looked at me like I was on meth, understandably so, and then started to ask me to explain everything again. However, he kind of froze and his mouth was now hanging open, and I followed his gaze. An absolutely ridiculously tall man was kind of unfolding himself from my back seat, and we watched as he fled into the darkness of the night. Now bear in mind, this was on the edge of the suburbs, so he fled into some kind of forested area, and from the expression on his face, I couldn't even claim to this day that he meant me harm. It almost looked like he was petrified too. Of course, that didn't stop me calling the cops. They got to the gas station really fast and searched the nearby area. They did, in fact, find a knife nearby. Apparently, it was some kind of fish knife for sushi, but it had nothing on it. When they paid to visit the delivery customers, they were just as baffled as I was. Everyone was accounted for, which they could prove, and nobody who lived there matched the description that I gave of the guy who'd crept into my back seat. Now, I never did find out who he was or what his motives were. I didn't quit my delivery job or anything silly like that. I just took to actually locking the car door whenever I stepped out to make a delivery, regardless of how brief I thought I would be. And always, I always check the back seat no matter what. Something tells me that the guy hiding out in my car didn't mean me harm, but the look of fear and alarm on his face as we watched him flee makes me think that someone out there would have done us more harm than I can even fathom if they'd found it. It's one of those creepy mysteries that I'm grateful didn't turn into an unsolved murder and has finally given me something to write into you about. But like they say, be careful what you wish for, because I feel like this was a cautionary tale where the lesson is that it's far better not to wish you had a scary story to share with internet people. So I'm from England, and I won't say where so as not to dox myself or lose my job, but I'm a postwoman, or a postie as we say here, and I love my job. I work a rural route, and I've been on the same route for years, thanks to some pleading and a friendship with the head postmaster. Normally, posties get shifted around all the time, and so I kind of know everyone on my little route, at least everyone who makes themselves known to me anyway. There was Stu, a mature student who would always be waiting at the door whenever the mail came and shared his latest work on marine biology with me. I hadn't started out as being remotely interested in marine biology, but Stu had mentioned a few things in passing and I'd been hooked, pun intended. Now there was old Mrs. Rader, who always seemed to have some insane medical ailment which she'd relay to me with the greatest of glee, and I became convinced that she was a medical miracle. And then there was the Four Bottoms, an extremely flamboyant glam rock band by night and a middle-aged polycule who enjoyed cardigans and gardening by day. And then there was Joe and Joanne, two twins with rich parents who often got Amazon parcels in the mail, and I've never seen two kids who were more spoiled but more grateful for everything they'd got. Now the one guy I never got to know was Farmer McKay, the allegedly grouchy postman-hating farmer who lived in the small holding on the outskirts of town. Now, to call it a farm would be extremely generous, but it did have a few goats, a couple of sheep, a pig, and some chickens, and it was also filthy, even by farm standards, and as far as I know, he made an entire living selling eggs and milk to locals. Now, I gotta admit, I prefer Sainsbury's. Now, one day, for the first time in about 6 years of doing this route, I was shocked to find that I had a collection for McKay's farm. Not everyone knows this, but you can book Royal Mail to collect parcels, often for free, instead of having to take them to a post office. McKay had booked a free collection with instructions absolutely not to knock and disturb him, but instead find the package in an outhouse which he kindly uploaded a picture of so there was no mistaking it. Now, I made sure that I wore my wellies that day, as I didn't fancy wading across the sludge that McKay called a yard. It turns out I made the right call, because the mud leading to the safe place outhouse was almost up to my ankles. When I opened the outhouse, I was met with a smell that almost made me gag. I didn't even want to look at what else he kept in there, but thankfully the Royal Mailbox was visible right at the front, so I grabbed it and headed back to my van. Now, halfway back to my vehicle, I noticed that the parcel was leaking. Real disgusting, foul-smelling liquid dripping out of the bottom of the box. Well, there's absolutely no way that I can take this as a collection for a million reasons. And now, I also couldn't just abandon it, which meant that I had to break his cardinal rule and go knock on his door and tell him that, unfortunately, I couldn't accept his collection. Halfway between my van and the front door of the farm, the package I'm carrying sort of collapses inward. The bottom falls out and the contents spill all over my bottom half. Now let me tell you, I've smelled some bad smells in my time. Before I became a postwoman, I was a nursing assistant in my late teens and early 20s, and there was this one old lady that I treated who I would swear had death himself living in her nether regions. This made that smell like flowers and cinnamon. It was a pile of rotting, liquefying organs, and now it was covering as much of my legs and torso as it managed to besmirch. I dropped the destroyed parcel and threw up there and then, which really didn't help matters. And now I was kind of mad at Farmer McKay. There are extremely strict rules about what you can and can't mail in the UK, and rotting, liquefied offal is definitely a forbidden item. I didn't even need to check the handbook to know about that. But then I started looking at all that stuff. Maybe my imagination was running away from me, but I was sure that I could make out part of a human spine among the gore. An eyeball winked out at me, clearly fresher than some of the other unspecified parts that covered me, the ground, and everywhere. Now I suddenly got this idea that McKay was trying to use the Postal Service to hide evidence of a crime, and standing out there in the open in the center of this small holding in the middle of nowhere, I suddenly felt very vulnerable and exposed. At this point I didn't know what to do. I was convinced my colleagues would give me absolute crap if I fled the scene, but I started picturing Farmer McKay hiding behind a curtain, looking out one of the windows, a cocked shotgun aimed right at me. And so I kind of ran toward the main house. As the front door began to open before I even reached the porch, I wondered if I'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. But the man who stood on the doorstep wasn't Farmer McKay. I could see the resemblance, but he was a much younger man, and as he took in the sight of me covered in those organs and trembling in fear, I could see genuine guilt and regret on his face. He didn't invite me inside. You can hardly blame him. I was dripping in unspecified corpse juices. But there on the doorstep he explained that Farmer McKay had been taken away by doctors the day before after increasingly strange and erratic behavior that had gone unnoticed by his family. He apologized profusely for the parcel collection being overlooked because they should have known that something was awry. McKay never sent packages. I was severely shaken, not least because I couldn't face the idea of getting in my beloved post van covered in this. And thankfully, the grandson, as that's who he turned out to be, helped me hose off the worst of it before I headed back to my van. It's what I saw in the back that really caused this to be a scary story, though. I made the mistake of glancing into the dilapidated barn as I trekked across the mud to my post van, and I only caught a quick glimpse because I looked away as quickly as possible. But no matter how many hot showers I took to wash off all those juices and the gore from my body, I can never scrub the sight that I saw from my mind. In the barn, Farmer McKay had piled what were presumably all of his animals. I couldn't make out which species they were. They'd all melted into one festering, indiscernible pile of corpses. A number of empty cardboard boxes sat nearby, and I can only assume McKay planned on shipping the remains of his animals to various places. To this day, it drives me mad that I never checked and don't remember who the recipient of the original parcel was. I have no idea what his motive was for mailing these liquefied parts, and I guess that's partly the problem with whatever was wrong with him, dementia or whatever had befallen him. It doesn't make sense. He could have been aiming for revenge on his enemies, and he could have believed that he was shipping genuine prime cuts to customers of his farm. Either way, I'm not sure I ever want to know. The McKay small holding was demolished not long after, and after what I saw, I can't say I'm at all sorry that it became one less stop on my postal route. No, I'm just going to admit this up front. I was an absolute a-hole in college. Like the kind of smug, not quite rich jokester, prankster who thinks he's way funnier than he is. And I'm also glad this was around 15 years ago, because a few years later, and I genuinely think that I would have tried to launch a career as one of those intolerable YouTube pranksters. You know the ones I'm talking about. Now thankfully my pranking days extended solely to being the class clown, and this led to a certain fraternity paying attention to me and encouraging me to pledge, so I did. Honestly, I loved the hazing. I was the one getting pranked, sure, but it made me the center of attention, and I was always up for going a step further than my fellow pledges. Now looking back, I probably came across like the most cringe tryhard imaginable, and the frat bros scouting me out must have thought that they'd lucked out with a clueless gooner like me. Now, I still wonder to this day whether if things had turned out differently, I would have been rejected from the fraternity anyway, and I kind of think that maybe I would have as the ultimate prank. And so when I was doing my initiation, it was back when Amazon had just gotten really big, and with their meteoric rise, we'd also seen a decline in the quality of delivery drivers. It was that weird period between Amazon drivers treating your packages like a Goomba from Mario, and Ring doorbells only existing for the rich and famous. And so regularly, Amazon packages were just free for the taking, dumped into people's yards or left on their front doorsteps ready for some complete idiot like me to come along and swipe them, and then inevitably trash the contents unless it was something really good, which it never was. Now, I must have stolen upwards of 15 packages from poor, stupid Amazon customers. Now, one time I got a box of lingerie, and another time there was this wiener pump, and those are literally the only two remotely interesting things I stole. Mostly I just took people's vitamins, a dog bowl, a little plush toy, and some exercise equipment and other assorted stuff. And then one day, I saw it. A large, tantalizing package sitting on a doorstep just there for the taking. It had to be something good, like a microwave oven or a custom kitchen delivery. It just had to be, and I knew it. Now, I could feel it in my bones, so I had my idiot cameraman, another pledge, film me creeping up to do a crab walk in a hoodie and jeans like I was some type of Temu iDubbbz. And then I grasped the package with both hands and yanked it backwards. It exploded. And I don't mean one of those cute glitter bombs that they use now. I mean, it literally exploded. It burned my face and scorched my hoodie, the polyester, right to my skin. No, I was screaming and disoriented and in absolute agony. My cameraman, the coward that he was, had already shrieked and ran away. And then they came, leaping out of the bushes, a group of masked men waiting for me to try to steal that package. Now, I was down for the count, suffering from what felt like third-degree burns, but realistically were probably only first-degree. They felt worse, though, as the masked men started kicking and punching me. They were yelling at me for being a thief, a scum, a criminal. They said I was everything wrong with America, that I was ruining the fabric of this goddamn country. All because I tried to steal an Amazon package as part of a fraternity prank. And you know what? I can't disagree with them. I was a prick, and I deserved a kicking. And I can't say I deserved the shattered eye socket or the permanent limp or the shattered arm that required a metal rod to hold it together, and maybe that punishment was a bit extreme. But at the time, I did convince myself that I deserved it. And the paramedics were called by a neighbor, obviously, long after the masked men had disappeared. But I told them I was jumped by a gang of young people from a rival college, and no, I had no idea who they were, and I preferred that they didn't pursue the crime if possible. And the cops honestly seemed all too happy to oblige. Less work, less paperwork, I guess. And I really did convince myself that I had it coming, and maybe I was right. Maybe I did. But here's the really weird part, though. I went back to that house months later, and I wasn't sure if I'd approach or not, but I decided to just watch from my car for a while. Maybe it had new owners. Maybe this wasn't who I tried to steal the package from. But the people living in the house now were a young family with 2 young kids. None of them seemed like the type to be involved in a violent assault. And so to this day, I don't know if I was targeted by someone related to the household or a group of violent vigilantes who were going after people like me. Now, the latter idea is kind of terrifying because it kind of makes me wonder, what if they decided that I haven't changed my ways enough and come after me again? Now, I've tried my best. I've tried to be a clean living boy, and one thing's for sure. I did not pursue joining that fraternity after all, and a regular dorm room and weekly chess club is all the excitement I want in my life. Thank you very much.
We picked the absolute worst weekend to go, which ended up honestly being kind of the plan. Janelle had been sending me clips and clips for weeks now. Skinwalker Ranch stuff, night vision, thermal hits, all of it calling me to Utah. Cole, of course, didn't buy any of it, but he still loaded his shit up when we decided to make a trip out of it. We lived a few hours away in western Colorado, Grand Junction area, close enough that the Utah Basin felt within reach if we committed a few miles to somebody's car. It was holiday weekend, but the monsoon storms were keeping people out, and that was the draw. Less traffic, fewer campers, just open land and whatever decided to come out and join us. I'm sure everybody here knows the legends, and that's exactly what we were looking for. Shapeshifters, aliens, UFOs, immortal wolves, the works. The basin stretched out in every direction, the sky stacked up with dark storm clouds. Lightning flickered in the distance, mostly north, so we followed roads a little bit more south and west. Everything looked beautiful after the seasonal rains. If you haven't seen it, you gotta. We stayed clear of the ranch itself, none of us wanting to cause any problems, so we found a dirt pull-off and hiked up to this low mesa. From there, we could see a narrow runoff cutting through the basin below, fed by the storms. It was almost really like our own monsoon river and waterfall with no one else around to bother. It was a nice solid spot, open visibility, higher ground, nothing boxed in around us. It was secure and majestic, all that good stoner shit. We set up camp, smoked a couple of Colorado fatties, and wandered a bit around the edge before heading back, just as the light started to fade. And that's when Janelle stopped next to me. Hey, look at that. The ground around camp was slopped from the rain, holding clean impressions, tracks, not scattered, an obvious loop around the spot that we picked. Big deep paw prints with wide pads and long toes, each one about the size of my hand. Whatever made them had to be huge, 3-4 feet tall easily, 200 pounds. I'm completely guessing here, but these prints were insane. Cole crouched near one, studied it, and prodded it with a stick. Lion? He said. Looks more like a dog to me. I looked past the trail towards the edge of the mesa and the basin beyond. Nothing was moving, no sound but the faint water below, and rapidly disappearing sunlight. We didn't move camp, it was a little too late for that. Instead, we built the fire up like a witch's pyre and kept it fed, letting it crack and throw light as far as it could. Keeping the devils away, I said. I'll admit we were jittery for a bit, but found our groove once we started talking and smoking again. I found myself continuously looking over my shoulder, though expecting something to be looking back, and nothing ever was. We fully settled in after that, not really even talking about those tracks. Cole heated up an MRE, Janelle packed another bowl, and I kept the fire going. Between the three of us, we had enough light and noise to feel like we actually owned the space we were in. The basin stayed quiet, just the low sound of runoff moving in the wash below the mesa. Clouds drifted in and out, showing stars for a few minutes at a time before covering them back up. Every now and then, lightning flashed pretty far off, and thunder would follow 10 or 20 seconds later. The monsoon is unparalleled in terms of desert beauty. We ate, smoked, passed things around. Janelle told us a couple of stories that she'd read about the area, Cole immediately poking fun at them, but he didn't wander far from the fire. At one point, we broke out the s'mores. It felt juvenile, I know, but unless you've had them while you're baked, you don't really understand. Janelle burned her first few marshmallows, and I mean vaporizing these things, and Cole gave her shit for it. I laughed and looked over, and that's when I saw the eyes, low, just outside of the firelight. Hey, what the fuck is that? They both looked. A coyote stood at the edge of the glow. You could make out the head and the ears, the eyes reflecting back at us. It wasn't moving. Cole shook his head. No way. Janelle leaned forward a little bit, holding her stick out. Come on, she said, like it was a fucking lapdog. I picked up a s'more and held it out too. None of us were taking this seriously. It was just a little coyote. At first it didn't move, not a muscle, and then it stepped forward, slow, deceptively agile. Another step and more of it came into the light. It looked emaciated. Damn, Janelle said, that thing's starving. It continued coming closer. One more step and then its head was fully in the firelight now. Now it wasn't just skinny. There was no body at all. The fur ended at the base of the neck, dark and wet. Nothing behind it, no shoulders, no movement you could track. And then something shifted behind it, a hand, a wrist, knuckles. It was wrapped around the spine, holding the head up. An arm followed, slick with blood up to the elbow. The rest of him staying mostly in the dark, just enough to see that he was crouching. Janelle made a small sound. Cole didn't say anything, but I noticed his hand inching toward a solid length of wood that was near the fire pit. A man stepped in a little closer and dropped the head at the edge of the fire. It hit the dirt with a sickening plop, eyes looking at all of us, and nothing at the same time. He smiled. All we could see of him was his nearest arm and shoulder and his face. All the rest was still draped in liquid shadow. He said something in a different language, and I didn't catch a damn word of it. And then he turned, disappeared, without making any kind of sound, just nothing dramatic, just kind of gone. The fire kept popping and nobody moved. The head had stayed where it landed. We didn't really talk about it, we just kind of reacted to what we saw. All three of us scrambled, knocking into one another, kicking shit over, leaving everything where it fell. The fire seemed to fan a tower of flames behind us, illuminating every step, almost like something was, in fact, encouraging us to go. The car wasn't really that far, but it felt like forever through the darkness. Cole got there first, fumbling with the keys, swearing under his breath. The locks clicked and we piled in on top of each other, slamming doors, trying to get eyes out the window, see if whoever that was following us. And then we all froze, almost like deer getting caught in headlights. The whole reason we were down here: lock the doors. Cole slapped a button and every door clicked around us. We sat there breathing, staring, terrified. The Blazer had supplies still: water, power bars, extra clothes. There was even a few joints tucked in the glove box, enough to get through the night. For a second we talked about leaving, just driving out and forgetting about the camp, but everything we had was still back there. Wallets, phones, packs, our valuables were back there, inside the tent or scattered now in the dirt. Cole turned on the headlights and I almost couldn't look. The beams cut across the brush, flattening everything into pale shapes and robust shadows. And there he was, just outside of the reach of the light, moving along the edge of it. It almost looked like he was pacing back and forth, that same black body paint, the same posture. He turned his head toward us and smiled. Then he did something really strange. Light on his feet, almost playful, a quick, loose few steps. This guy was dancing. And then he slipped back out of sight. We didn't open up the doors again because why would we, or how could we? And that night dragged on. We slept in short bursts, waking up to every little sound, shifting shadows, nothing we could ever point to directly. Wherever he was, he didn't come back into the light, but we were pretty sure he was still wandering the area. Some of the noises were just a little too human. Then at first light we moved, back to camp, quick as we could. Every step was a struggle. I felt like I was crossing a battlefield. I was expecting a bullet or a mortar blast to take me out at any second. The camp finally came into view, and we scanned the area, then booked it inside. A fire pit was cold. Our stuff was right where we left it. That coyote head was gone. Just a dark patch of dirt where it had been last night. I think we packed everything up in a minute, maybe two, threw everything over our shoulders, and quickly retreated back to the Blazer. None of us have been back since, and none of us fielded any interviews. There's no way we can prove it. The questions just get more and more pointed. So we decided it really ain't worth the emotions to relive it all. We asked for an experience at Skinwalker Canyon, and by God, we fucking got one. I've been camping for most of my life, but there's one trip that is still stuck with me. Spoiler alert, nothing actually happened, at least nothing I can explain. Still, it was super weird, and I haven't gotten a good answer when I shared it. I live in South Carolina, and every spring I try to get out for a solo trip at least once before the weather breaks. That year I decided to go a little further than I normally would. I followed a series of dirt roads past the usual spots, just seeing where they led me to. Eventually I ended up on a narrow track that looked like it didn't get much use. I dropped down into an area near the creek surrounded by thick woodland. It was a good setup. No other cars, no trash, no signs of anybody had been there at least recently. I parked, set up, and got a fire going. Everything was normal. But not long after I settled in, I started to get that feeling that I wasn't really alone. Nothing obvious, just a constant awareness that didn't really go away. And I know you know the feeling I'm talking about. The woods were quiet, which is what you want when you're poaching. Not completely silent, but missing that usual background noise. Every so often I'd catch movement in the trees, just these quick shifts that disappeared as soon as I focused on them. I figured it had to be the animals or maybe just the wind. But still that feeling stayed, that undeniable sensation of being watched. I finished my usual camp chores while the sun went down and did my best to just ignore it. I settled in the chair and tried to relax, but that feeling did not go away. If anything, it got worse once the sun really started to fade. And that's when I noticed what was missing. There's no bugs. It didn't hit me all at once, but Then I noticed it. No crickets, no hum, nothing rising up with the dark like it always does. Even all the birds had gone quiet now. The whole place felt dead in the water. Paired with that feeling that I'd had all evening, like I was being watched, all of it was putting me on edge. My first thought was immediately that it was a predator, something big enough to clear everything else out. It's not uncommon for a bear or a big cat to comb through an area, and every other animal will evacuate immediately. Now, I'm not new to this, so I didn't panic. I walked back to the truck, opened the door, and pulled out my .45 from the console. I checked it, set it on the table within reach, then grabbed the 12 gauge from the back and leaned it up against the wheel well, right where I could get to it if I needed it. That made me feel a little better. This isn't a moment of pride, but as I mentioned, my intent was to poach. I know what you're saying, I know what you're thinking. It's illegal, it's shitty, but when you live out here, shooting a few squirrels and coyotes really ain't the end of the world. And I don't waste it. I keep the pelts, make stew from whatever meat I can get. Still, when you're hunting illegally, you gotta be careful and extra aware of your surroundings. I turned back towards the fire and took a step, and that's when I saw. There's a man standing behind the fire pit, far enough that the light was only catching his silhouette. I froze, and for a second I honestly thought maybe I was just seeing things. Then he raised his hand slowly, like he knew exactly what I was thinking. "Hey," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." My pulse kicked hard, and I hadn't even heard him walk up. I hadn't heard anything, and now there was just someone speaking to me. "We're just passing through," he added, taking a careful step forward. Then two more shapes moved behind him. They came out of the trees one at a time, all dressed the same. Camouflage, chest rigs, helmets, radios clipped in. Night vision mounted up top, rifles slung tight to their bodies, not sloppy or thrown together. Everything looked calculated and professional. They were geared up like real military operators. Part of me panicked. Were they game and fish? Surely the forest rangers didn't employ RoboCop super soldiers for nighttime orbs and operations. For a few moments, I thought these guys were law enforcement and were here to royally fuck my night up. The first guy kept talking. We're just running an overnight exercise in the area, heading back in a few hours. We're actually on the return ruck right now." I didn't say anything. I was still trying to process how long they'd been out there, and by the sounds of it, they weren't the police. "Are you army or something?" I finally asked. "Yeah, something like that," he said, nodding toward my cooler. "Just looking for a little morale boost." "Morale boost?" I said. "Yeah, man. You got any alcohol?" It was such a normal question that I almost laughed. Was I being fucking robbed? Yeah, I said. "Beer, and I got a couple of bottles of whiskey." Honesty is the best policy when guys rolling into the camp are carrying M4s and enough ammo to sack a small town. There was a pause, and I thought about the pistol sitting on the table, just within reach. For a second, I considered grabbing it, not raising it, just having it in my hand. They were armed, up in my business, and I felt like a dumbass for having firearms, but not readily available. Before I could move, the guy's tone shifted just a hair. "Don't reach for that gun on the table." I went still. It was calm, a clear command. Out of instinct, I glanced back toward my truck. There was another one of them standing there, half in the dark, right between me and the shotgun. I hadn't even seen him move into position. He was just kind of there, flanking me, interrupting my path to my weapon. These guys were good. They'd been watching me, probably since I got here. The first guy then pulls out this thick roll of cash from his pocket and held it up. "We'll trade you 1 bottle of whiskey, 6 beers, and whatever food you're willing to part with." It was a lot of money too, more than made sense for what he was asking for. I hesitated, then nodded. All right. It was better than being robbed. I grabbed a bottle, a 6-pack, a bag of jerky, a pack of bratwurst from the cooler, and handed it over. My hands felt steady, but everything else in me was shaking like a leaf in the wind. He then passed me the cash without even counting it. "Appreciate it." Up close, they looked a lot more put together. No wasted movement, nobody talking unless they had to. One of them was still scanning the woods like the whole time, using his night vision to see everything. You guys can hang out if you want," I said, mostly out of reflex. "Use my fire to cook if you need to." He shook his head. "No, we got a few miles left. Need to be back before sunrise." "Right." He gave me a nod, shook my hand, then turned away. The others were already moving. Within a few seconds, they slipped back into the trees, heading off in the opposite direction they'd come from. And just like that, they were gone. I spent the rest of the evening wondering what they were doing and how long they'd been doing it for. Obviously, I rolled into their training when I chose my campsite, but what training was that? Military, government, private sector? Good old boys just training for the end of the world? Were they dangerous? Did they even point their guns at me, deciding if I was a target? Lots and lots of questions that night, but no answers. I finished my camping trip and didn't see any other signs of those guys. Didn't hear any machine gun fire from the woods either, just another South Carolina mystery. One thing I will tell you though, those guys just dropping into camp put the fear of God into me that night. That was the last time I ever had the intention of poaching a wild animal. We were fishing the last leg of the sweep when we heard it. 14 of us, in fact, spread out along the creek, moving steady and quiet. Water up to our calves, gear damp, just working our way through the final straps before heading back to the rendezvous. No talking, just signals. Carter stopped first, closed fist, everybody locked in place. He pointed up toward the dirt road that was running along the ridge. An engine. We shifted off the creek line and into the bank, using whatever cover we had. The truck then came through a minute later, older pickup moving slow. It passed us, then backed into a small clearing above. We stayed put and watched. One guy, mid-30s maybe, he got outstretched, then started setting up like he planned to stay a while. Chair, cooler, small fire pit. Nothing rushed, no phones, no music, just a local enjoying some nature. Carter gave us the signal to observe, so we did. Watching the locals was how we learned about Pineland. The sun kept dropping. The guy cracked a drink and sat down facing the fire. Didn't really look around much. Didn't seem too concerned about being alone out here. Haze caught my eyes. Small shrug. Solo? Maybe. Hard to say if he planned on anybody else showing up. Carter made the call. He would approach. The rest remained out of sight until he actually made contact. We moved up from the creek in this loose line. No noise beyond what we could avoid. No sudden movements. Just enough spacing for cover and flanking maneuvers. The guy didn't notice us right away. When he did, he stiffened and stood up. It was obvious. He had just turned back to his campfire when he spotted Carter. The rest of us hung back, ready for whatever this Pineline indigenous threw at us. They shared some words and 2 more operators stepped up behind Carter. Just a little visual pressure. I was busy watching the forest, more concerned with unexpected company showing up out of nowhere. We already knew this guy was armed. We just didn't know what the extent of his wrath might be. "You guys army?" I heard him ask, and a couple of us chuckled. I watched his hands. They were empty, but there was a pistol on his camping table, just a couple of feet away, and a shotgun leaning up against his truck. When I looked, though, I saw Gavani had positioned himself between the camper and the weapon. Unless this guy had something concealed, we seemed to be in the clear. This wasn't an interrogation. This wasn't part of the mission at all. This was actually a bartering attempt. Everybody in the squadron pooled their cash, just short of $500 American, and wanted to exchange it for food and alcohol. Their rations had run out 2 days prior, and now we were running on empty. No food, very little water, and sleep deprived beyond all reason. Carter continued to broker a deal. We held formation, and this guy never went for his weapon. He actually offered his campfire with us, which was very gracious. Not too many people would offer to break bread with a squad of armed military spooks in the middle of the night. Carter and the locals said goodbye, and off we went. We passed through his camp when we were done, and followed a trail northwest that took us up into some hills. We continued the sweep, moving 3 miles deeper into the woods. Terrain got rougher, thick brush, but it thinned out as we climbed. The ridge eventually came up gradually, then steepened. We kept pace and topped out just before sunrise. Carter called a halt. We dumped out our shit and stayed flat out on the overlook. Carter broke out the whiskey, slugged it, and then passed it. Within a few hours, we cooked the brats over a small flame, ate the jerky, and drank every drop of alcohol that camper had sold us. Never in my life have I been more grateful to be a red-blooded American than drinking that whiskey in the dark. We settled in and watched the valley and looked back the way we came. Nothing else. Up ahead, I caught a thin line of smoke rising up from the trees. It was miles and miles in opposite direction of the original camp that we observed. I pointed it out to Hayes. He followed it and then nodded at me. Carter picked it up a second later and gave me a quick signal. We moved at first light. Game trails cut the easiest path throughout that zone, so that's what we used. Staggered spacing, same as before. On the approach, every few hundred feet, we dropped someone back for rear security and then kept pushing forward. The smoke had been steady through the morning. Whatever was out there was stationary. It took 3 miles before we saw signs of a camp. Flattened grass scraps, a path worn into the dirt. We started dropping guys back within a half mile of the camp itself. And then we heard yelling, violent, aggressive yelling. Carter slowed us down and brought us into this tight formation, and we moved that last stretch carefully, using the trees and brush to break line of sight. When we got eyes on it, the situation was pretty simple. 1 man, 1 woman, 2 kids in a small tent off to the side. The man was in the woman's face, shouting, shoving her back every time she tried to step away. Could be drunk, could just be crazy. In the moment from that distance, it was really impossible to tell though. The kids weren't even reacting, just sitting there quiet, staring out through their tent flap. Hayes leaned into me. "This isn't the mission." Nobody answered him. Carter gave a quick set of signals and we spread out, circling in. 2 peeled wide to the rear. Carter looped around the approach from the front. The rest of us held the tree line behind the man that was yelling. He had no idea that he was surrounded by 14 armed killers. We closed the distance until we were actually in position. Then Miller stepped out. "Hey," he called out, much like Carter did with the previous local. The guy spun immediately, already angry, looking for somebody else to take it out on. "The hell is it?" He stopped when he saw the chest rig, the rifle, and then the rest of us partially visible in the trees behind him. Shockingly, his anger didn't disappear, it changed shape. "This your land?" he said, trying to push back, and Miller didn't move. "Nope." "Then get the hell out of here." Miller glanced past him, just enough to acknowledge the rest of us. "We're not the only ones here," he said. "Take a look for yourself, friend." The guy did. A quick glance over his shoulder and then another one, slower. He started to understand that he was woefully outgunned. Carter brought up a hand for a little peekaboo wave. The guy turned to Miller's face, much quieter now. "What do you want?" Miller just kept it simple with him. "You're done." The guy frowned. "Done with what?" "With that," Miller said, nodding toward the woman. "This whole situation, I don't really know what your culture and customs are out here, but where I'm from, we don't beat women." There was silence for a second. The guy shifted, trying to square up again. "What the fuck are you?" Miller cut him off. "I'm not interested in parley, friend. Quit talking to me before my nice friends and I bury you out here." Nobody raised a weapon because nobody needed to. The guy looked around again, counting, his head spinning. Then he stepped back. Miller didn't waste any time. He turned slightly toward the woman. "Pack up what you need, get the kids in the vehicle and leave. Don't come back for this asshole either." She hesitated like she wasn't even sure this was real. "You're good," Miller said. "Got somewhere to go?" The kids were already moving, like they'd been waiting for some kind of opening. It was actually painful to watch, but I was grateful to have come upon them in this situation and be able to help a lending hand, the American way. A couple of us shifted positions to let them pass to the car, and one of the guys crouched and whispered, "You're doing really good. Be brave. This will be over soon." The kid didn't say anything, just nodded and kept going. They were probably just as shocked as Mom to see these army guys come out of the woods. Within a few minutes, they had what they needed, bags thrown together, essentials only. The woman didn't look at the man again, She got the kids in the vehicle, started it, and then pulled out without so much as tapping the brake pedal. We listened to the engine, fade until it was gone. And then it was just us and him. He tried to talk, start explaining. Excuses mostly, and none of it mattered to us. We weren't here to topple a regime. It started with the shitbag militants just like this guy. Carter stepped in this time. "All right, here's how this works," he said. "You're gonna listen, and you're gonna adjust, starting now." The guy nodded so hard I thought he was about to get whiplash. The rest of the morning was spent on that. We kept it within reason, and by it, I think you know what I'm talking about. I can't go into detail for legal reasons, but let's just say that he was a perfect candidate for some field training in regard to interrogation and physical limitations of the human body. Some will call it torture. In the military, we call it attitude improvement. By the time we were done, he understood what was expected of him, and he told us as much. We left him there at the edge of his own camp, quiet, cooperative, and a lot less sure of himself than he'd been an hour earlier, bleeding from his gums, his fingernails, the soft skin inside his armpits. No paperwork, no report, no one to help him get back to town. And we stepped back into that tree line and quickly moved out, our exercise continuing. I grew up in a very small town. One stoplight, one grocery store, one high school that funneled you straight to the sawmill or the firehouse, or, of course, ran you out of town to bigger and better things. I ended up choosing the firehouse. Right after graduation, I went through a community college EMT program. Nothing super fancy, just enough to get certified and stay local. By 20, I was running calls in the same hills that I grew up in. Same back roads, same houses, same people. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid all of my bills and gave me this sense of purpose. And that was enough to keep me close to home. Most of my nights were very slow. You learn to live in that kind of in-between half sleep and half ready, waiting for something to break up the silence and hope that it wasn't a fatality of somebody that you knew. My story, or the call, came in just after 2 a.m. We were stretched out in the recliners when the phone rang beside us. Not the usual radio call, but the direct line to the firehouse, which wasn't super unusual, but at this hour, it told me something bad had happened. I jumped to my feet, grabbed the phone, and asked if they had an emergency. The movement on the line was rustling, maybe breathing, and then it just kind of cut out. I hung up and the phone rang again, not 30 seconds later. No answer. 5 minutes go by, and the same number came through once again. Same dead air, but this time there was something underneath it. Breath, wind, running, something to that effect. By the third call, we were all the way awake now. Literally everybody on the shift was in the command room, leaning over the phone, wondering what the hell was going on. "Open line or something?" Jess asked, already pulling on her boots. She was a little older than me and my constant companion inside the ambulance. "Yeah, but something's there," I said, listening. "It's gotta be a live call." Dispatch came on, the local precinct through the encrypted radio, and sounded obviously very confused themselves.
"Fire and medical, we're receiving repeated 911 calls from the same number. No verbal contact. Stand by as we get a location."
As we waited, the fourth call came in. At first, it was in fact the same static and that shifting noise, and then it cleared just for a second like somebody had picked up the phone right off the ground. And then we heard a scream. Not yelling, not somebody trying to call for help. This was true desperation, like someone was being murdered on the other end of the line. It cut off so fast, it almost didn't even feel real. Nobody spoke for a second or two. Then dispatch came through once more.
"Fire, we're pinging location. Stand by, get an ambulance ready."
You could feel the mood shift. It wasn't a lift assist or a drunk in a ditch. It sounded really dangerous. And now we're getting sent out there. A few seconds later, we got a rough location. Mountain turnout off of Country Road 18, about 30 minutes out. "Are you sending police presence?" I asked. The radio crackled.
"It's a busy night on our end. No units are available, and honestly, whoever this number is called the fire department directly. I'm guessing they need medical. I won't be sending units at this time."
Can you put us on the list, at least get a unit out there when somebody is available? I asked.
You got it.
And that was that. Jess looked at me and I nodded and we went straight to the garage. It was our turn to field the call anyway. We got our gear loaded up, ambulance rolling. Lights off for the drive, siren ready if needed. The sheriff's office said they would head that way when they could, but we were a lot closer. The roads out here always felt a lot longer at night, if that makes sense. Once you leave town, it climbs the mountain rapidly, there's tight curves, and no guardrails for most of it, just trees crowding in on both sides of you. Your headlights hit trunks and branches and nothing beyond. It feels like the road just terminates in every single direction. Dispatch tried the number again while we were en route. Nothing, and got no more calls. We were told to update both the firehouse and dispatch with everything that we come across out there. You think this is just some kind of prank? Jess asked me after a while. I shook my head. I don't think so. Not with that scream. I've never heard anything like that. Really? We used to do prank calls all the time. Look, just call it intuition. I think we're about to roll into something really weird, I said back. She didn't push it. When we hit the turnout, I slowed down but kept the brights on, scanning for any kind of movement. There was just one car parked off the shoulder, older sedan, engine off, driver's side door hanging wide open. No movement, no lights, nobody around. This had to be the place though, but it was completely desolate. I stepped out, flashlight curving a narrow path across the dark. It was much colder than I was expecting, but it could have been just my nerves. It was also eerily quiet. No wind, no bugs, nothing disturbing the forest around us. Hello? I called out. Of course, I didn't get an answer. Jess moved off to the side, sweeping her light along the tree line. Between us and the brights from the ambo, we had a pretty good illumination of the area. The car looked empty at first, keys still in the ignition, door just hanging there. Then I saw a phone on the gravel just outside the driver's seat. I crouched down and picked it up, and the thing was absolutely painted in blood, unlocked and half dead. I set it on the hood of the car and just kept scanning the turnout. Whatever had happened out here was sudden, violent, and apparently left no survivors. Jess and I then lit up the turnout like a crime scene. Headlights, overhead lights flashing, both of us sweeping our flashlights in overlapping arcs. Gravel, brush, tree line. Nothing was moving. No sound except for our boots and the low hum of the engine behind us. Hello? It's the fire department. Medical is on site. Still got no answer. Is there anybody out here with an emergency? Are you hurt? Hello? We reported back to the station and told them that we found a vehicle, a phone, but no caller. They said they hadn't heard anything more either. No additional calls had come through, and county dispatch was quiet. We told them that we were going to inspect the car for any kind of clues as to what the hell had happened out here, then head back to the truck and wait for the sheriff's deputy to arrive. They told us that sounded good, and off we went. Up close, it didn't really look abandoned, and there was so much blood. Like, it looked like gallons of it, smeared across the hood in these long streaks, thick along the driver's side door, splattering the seat, the steering wheel. Some of it had dried already, dark and tacky, but most of it was still very much wet. Jesus Christ, Jess muttered. I leaned through the open door and scanned the interior. No body and no sign of where anybody had just kind of gone. Just blood and that god-awful rusty smell that comes along with it. Something bad had definitely taken place out here. I straightened up and reached for my radio. We need more. I didn't get to finish my sentence before the brush exploded behind us, fast and heavy. Jess snapped her light toward it. I turned just inside to see him come out of the trees, a man booking right at us full sprint and directly at me. We impacted pretty good and he wrapped me up in this tight crushing hug, screaming the whole time, just this raw panic noise into my shoulder. I shoved him as best I could, trying to create some kind of space. He was slick with blood, and it soaked through my shirt where he'd grabbed me at. I wrenched free, and it was easier than it should have been. I remember expecting some kind of fight in the moment, but there was almost zero resistance in getting out of his grip. He stumbled backwards, still yelling, hands half raised up, and that's when I saw them. Both of his hands were missing, everything but the thumbs. No fingers, just raw, uneven ends. Blood pouring down his wrists, gore, flaps of skin hanging from the wound. Hell, I thought I could see where the veins were splayed out across his palms. This guy was ruined. My brain was lagging for a second. I couldn't even collect myself. Jess. I snapped, backing up, wiping at my uniform, checking my skin. Nothing on my face, nothing on my eyes, and I needed to keep it that way. Jess was already moving. Sir, sit down. Sit down, you're in shock. He didn't listen at first, pacing in psychotic circles, shaking, gasping. We worked him down together, got him seated against the ambulance. He was very out of it at first, but hearing our words, seeing our uniforms, I think that snapped him back into reality within 10 minutes or so. I grabbed some gauze and Jess continued to wrap. We moved as quickly as the wounds would allow us to, and once his hands were somewhat packed, we broke out the Israeli bandages to really crank the pressure and get the bleeding back under control. Vaccine, stop bleed, the whole 9 yards. Stay with us, Jess said. Look at me, you're okay. Stop panicking, it's all gonna be fine. But he wasn't fine. I've never seen a human's eyes like that guy's. Black on black, so much white still visible. He was really pale, jaw chattering, words tripping over in one another. I watched him bite his tongue so many times that it started bleeding too. That's when it clicked that this guy was high as a kite, maybe drunk. There was a pretty bad meth problem going around in this area, so I assumed it had to be that. I gave the radio. Dispatch, 1 male, severe trauma to both hands, heavy blood loss, requesting additional units and law enforcement. Jess glanced over at me. You thinking attack? I shrugged. How the hell would I know? But then he started talking next to me. Car slipped. He stammered out. Jack gave out. Thought it was a flat. We both paused. He lifted his hands like he could show us. I went to change it. It was dark. I couldn't see. The car came down. My stomach dropped. All of them. It took all of them. He said, almost laughing. I didn't. Jess tightened the wraps. Hey. Don't think about that. We're with you. Everything is okay. I ran. He went on. I couldn't find my phone. I kept dropping it, blood everywhere. That explained all the calls. I used my thumbs, my nose. I kept calling, but there was no service. I couldn't hear. I couldn't see. I thought somebody was under the car. He kept rambling. Meth. I could see it. The eyes, the pacing, the paranoid tangled into everything. We got him loaded up into the rig as more units started to head up the road. Before I climbed in, I glanced back at the car. All that blood, all that chaos, and just nobody else out here. It was just him. To this day, it was one of the craziest things I've ever seen on call, and I couldn't believe that it turned out to be an accident with that level of injury. EMT out of Arkansas here. Night shift, rural service. Most of what we cover is mountains and forest. Nowhere safe, stable, or really desirable. The call for my story came in just after midnight. Older female, possible DOA. She said that she found her husband unresponsive. In our system, we go in first, no waiting on anybody else. We're so rural that if we had to wait for LEO to clear scenes, we would lose half of our patients. If they're gone, we confirm it in the field. Dispatch read off the address, but it was meaningless. It was the landmarks that would get us over there, not the directions. County road this, dirt turn off that, past the old gate, that kind of thing. Estimated time from the highway was 55 minutes. We started out fine. Pavement gave way to gravel, gravel picked up the packed dirt. Trees closed in on both sides, tall and dense. That kind that'll swallow up your headlights. My partner was the one driving. I was working the GPS, watching the blue line snake deeper and deeper into nothing. And then it just kind of stopped. The route vanished. No recalculating, no rerouting. Just a blank screen with a blinking arrow that didn't seem to belong anywhere else. I checked the paper map that we kept wedged between the seats and nothing. Same with our phones. No signal, no cached maps, just empty grids. Do we keep going?" my partner asked aloud. We kind of just looked at each other for a second, and then I nodded. We're already out here, so. The road kept narrowing until it wasn't really a road anymore. It felt like we'd slipped onto an ATV trail, branches scraping the sides of the ambulance, that long dry screech of bark against metal. At one point, something dragged hard enough along the box that I thought we'd torn a compartment door clean off. And when I looked, there was nothing out there, and the truck seemed to be fine. Still, I had that weird feeling of being watched that whole time. We tried the radio and got nothing, not even static, just dead air. And that's when it started to feel truly bizarre. Not just lost in the woods kind of thing, something less obvious than that. Like we weren't just off the map, but like we weren't supposed to be there at all. It felt as if the road that we were on shouldn't exist and would take us right out of reality. So, in the moment, we finally made the call to turn around. The problem was there wasn't really anywhere to do so. The trail was so tight that we had to back out the way we came. I climbed out, flashlight in hand, guiding my partner inch by inch while he reversed. Tires would slip in the mud, branches snap up against the box, the whole rig rocking like it didn't want to be out there either. It took us almost 30 minutes to back out far enough to find this tiny clearing where we could swing the ambulance around. That whole time, neither of us really said much. Just quiet directions and commands. Left a little. Hold it. Back. Now to the right. When we finally turned around, it felt like we just made this life-altering correction. We started heading back the way we'd come. And that's when we both saw him standing in the road. I told my partner to stop and we both leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. There's no way what I was looking at was real. At first, I assumed it had to be a trick of the light, shadows, branches lining up wrong. But then he moved, stepping right toward the truck. A man, super skinny, dressed all in black. No reflectors, no flashlight, no visible features whatsoever. He formed right out of the woodland and materialized right in front of us. We sat there, engine idling, both of us just staring at him. I remember whispering, "The hell is this guy doing out here?" My partner didn't have an answer for me. He was gripping the wheel, eyes locked on the figure, not even visibly breathing. 30 seconds passed, maybe more, and the man didn't wave. He didn't step aside. He just stood there, facing us. Then, slowly he raised one of his arms and pointed, not at us, past us, off to the right. We hadn't even noticed the side road before. It was barely more than a cut in the trees, swallowed up in darkness, no sign, no marker, just this narrow opening we would have driven right past if he hadn't been standing there. Shit, I guess we did drive right past it. I tried the radio again. Still nothing, and that weirdo continued to stand right directly in front of us. We had no dispatch, no sheriff's office, nobody. My partner looked at me. "You think maybe he's the one who called?" I didn't have an answer for him right away. I have been on calls like this before. Rural, isolated, people strung out, desperate, violent. We carried narcotics. We were targets in places like this if somebody decided so. Every bad scenario ran through my head all at once, but then I looked back at the man, still standing there, eyeballing the shit out of me, still pointing. "Well, only one way to find out, right?" I said. And we turned down the road. The trail got worse, narrower and unbelievably rougher. Branches clawing at the sides, scraping along the windows. It really felt like we were being pulled deeper into something instead of driving down an actual road. Then finally we see it, a trailer. There's a dim porch light flickering, barely holding on itself. We rolled to a stop and I felt it all hit me at once, how far out we actually were. No other houses, no lights, no sound except the engine and the wind pushing through the trees. We were over an hour from the highway, completely isolated and alone. We stepped out and approached the house. Every step forward was a real struggle. The door was already open, impenetrable darkness waiting for us beyond. Inside, we found her, an elderly woman sitting on the floor, back up against the wall. She looked up at us like she'd seen a ghost. Next to her lay the body, male, late 60s maybe, same height, same build, all same black clothing. I felt my stomach drop. What the hell? My partner knelt and checked him, cold, stiff, full rigor. "He's been gone a while," he muttered. "Hours at least." We worked through it, confirmation, documentation, trying to comfort the woman as best we could. She spoke very little. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming and crying for quite some time. I asked her if she had any neighbors. She shook her head at me though. Closest one back the way you came, 7 miles or so. Nobody nearby. Nobody could have been out on that road. What the hell? We asked about a phone and she pointed to the landline on the wall. We used it to call the sheriff's office and gave them all the information we could, even pinpointed the location for everybody else. When they finally arrived, following our tire tracks through the mud, we stepped outside to meet them all. I asked one of the deputies if they'd seen a man on the road, black clothes, tall. He just kind of frowned at me. No, we didn't pass anybody. Just followed your directions." Another deputy beside him shook his head as well. "Yeah, just your tracks, no other vehicles, no footprints that we could see." I didn't really say anything after that, and neither did my partner. We cleared up the scene as fast as we could, loaded up, and drove out without looking back. And really, neither of us talked about it ever again. Not on shift, not off shift, not even in passing. But I'll admit every now and again, when we get a call that takes us deep off into the forest, when the GPS flickers or the radio cuts out, I think back about that call and all the questions it seems to beg. I worked EMS in a small town for quite some time, population a few thousand at most. One stoplight, one diner that turned into a bar after dark, and a municipal building that had been repurposed so many times that nobody could give you a straight answer on what it was originally. At the time we were there, it served 3 roles at once. The front half was a public library. Attached to that was the police department, newer addition, but still sharing walls. On the far end was a volunteer fire station, no full-time crew, just a bay for the truck and a place to stage up equipment. Before all of that, it had been a church. That part was consistent no matter who you asked. Late 1800s from what I was told at least. The building wasn't large, but it was dense with history. Renovations layered over old construction, stairwells that didn't quite line up, hallways that ended where you wouldn't expect them to. It felt like multiple structures forced into one footprint, and that's exactly what it was. Living rule will do it to you. Certain needs and services have to be met, but space is very limited, so spaces become shared. Rural communities will put up a 5x5 shed with a hinged door. Call it the county hospital if they have to. Our ambulance was parked in the fire bay, but our bunk room was nowhere near it. To get there, you'd have to step out of the apparatus bay, walk a narrow hallway, go down a short staircase and cut through the library floor. Then take another set of stairs into the basement. The bottom, there were 2 doors. Left side was ours, 2 bunks, a small desk, and a locker. Right side led directly outside. That door opened up into a cemetery. No fence, no real boundary, just grass and headstones starting a few yards from the threshold. The oldest markers were worn down to the point of being unreadable, but still a few had some dates on them, early 1800s, and I remember one clearly saying 1820. My partner loved to take his smoke breaks out there. He treated it like a sketch comedy bit. Every time he'd step out, he'd say, "Hey, I'm gonna go hang out with my friends." Same line every shift. Said it loud enough to echo down the stairwell. Say it loud enough to wake the dead, I used to think. I didn't go out there unless I had to. Inside the building, things didn't sit right, not even during the day, and at night, it was far worse. The library lights would flicker without some kind of pattern. Not full outage, just brief dips like a kid playing with a dimmer knob. Doors wouldn't latch properly. You'd close one, walk 10 feet, hear it open up again behind you. Air pressure could explain some of it, sure, but not all of it. Sometimes you'd hear it click open when nothing else had moved. This happened the most to me when I was laying in bed alone. The most consistent thing, though, was the noise overhead. Heavy footsteps, not constant, but you'd hear them off and on. A few steps, pause, then a few more. Enough weight behind them to be distinct from settling or pipes. And it always sounded like it was directly above wherever you were standing in the moment. We didn't have anybody upstairs at night. The library was closed. The police side had its own entrance and floors. We checked it, and it was always empty. I guess you just kind of get used to ignoring things like that when you're in EMS. You categorize it as an unsolvable problem, move on to something that's actually worth your attention. But the environment does bleed into your work if there's long enough to. In the few months that I worked that assignment, I responded to 2 confirmed hangings. Both came in as welfare checks. Family couldn't make contact, requested somebody to go out and take a look themselves. The first was a farmhouse about 20 minutes outside of town. Dirt road access, no visible neighbors, property mostly overgrown. It didn't look abandoned, but it wasn't maintained either. We made entry through an unlocked door. The interior was quiet, no movement, no active hazards, and we cleared the room by room until we found access to the basement. It was a dirt floor space, no finished walls, just exposed framing and stone. Very limited lighting, single bulb overhead. And that's where we found her. Elderly female suspended from a ceiling beam. Partial decomp had not set in yet, but there was clear evidence that she'd been there for some time. She was dressed in what appeared to be a wedding dress, aged fabric, discolored, but still intact. There was some slight movement when we entered the room. Not active, just residual sway, like from the air displacement when we opened up the basement door. We confirmed no signs of life. Rigor was present, skin temperature was consistent with extended downtime. The rest of the call was procedural. Scene secured, law enforcement notified, coroner requested. What stuck with me though wasn't the method. That happens in this line of work. It's where she did it. The basement didn't feel lived in. No recent storage, no footprints in the dirt except our own. The beam that she used looked older than the house itself, like it had been part of some kind of earlier structure. It gave the impression that the event hadn't interrupted anything. She wanted to do this out of her own way in her own living space. It reminded me of an old dog going under the house just to die alone. That second call was similar in classification. Different layout, another remote residence, another welfare check, another prolonged downtime before discovery. By that point, the pattern had already started forming in my head, even if I didn't articulate it. You spend your night stationed in a building that used to be a church, sleeping below a library, next to a cemetery that predates most of the town. Then you respond to calls where people isolate themselves, choose enclosed, forgotten spaces, and end their lives in places that feel disconnected from everything else. Of course, there's no direct link, nothing you can actually document or present as any kind of evidence, but the overlap will still sit with you. After a few months, I ended up transferring out. Better call volume, better coverage area. At least that's what I told other people. I don't miss that building. I just had to get away from it. And I don't miss walking through the library at 2 a.m. with the lights dipping overhead and footsteps pacing all around me, knowing there wasn't supposed to be anybody else there.
Hey there, Uncle Unit. I'm a big fan of your channel. Been listening for a couple years now, and your videos along with the true crime podcasts I listen to make the long hauls across country a little more bearable. There was a story in one of your recent videos about a woman who was attacked on her prom night. A man wearing a rain poncho came at her with a knife while she was in the restroom, and it reminded me of this experience I had on the road back in 2002. And those times, I was running hauls out of Dallas down to Houston, and then back up through the Panhandle. I've been driving semi since I was in my early 20s. I figured I knew every stretch of I-35, every rest area, every way station like the back of my hand. You get into a rhythm out there. CB chatter, coffee from the truck stops, watching the miles tick by under the open Texas skies, bugs on the windshield, maybe the occasional blowout, but not much else. That night I was southbound on US 281, somewhere between Wichita Falls and Abilene. The only thing out that way is shrub bush and oil pumps. Around 2 a.m., my rig was heavy enough that the scales were calling me in at this little way station off the highway. It was basically just a concrete pad with a scale house, with one sleepy attendant inside. I pulled up, weighed in quick, no ticket, just the usual paperwork. Then I was waved through. I needed to hit the head real quick, too much coffee, so I parked my rig in the pull-through, killed the engine, and walked over to the restrooms. The place was dead quiet, except for the crickets and the weeds. The door creaked open. Call me crazy, but something didn't feel right about this place, and it wasn't just the smell of bleach and old piss. I felt like I wasn't alone in there. The only other time I felt this way was when I had my first encounter with a lot lizard. Look that up if you don't know. I stepped up to the urinal and started doing my business. That's when I heard it. Soft click of the latch behind me. One of the stall doors started opening, very slowly, like whoever was in there didn't want me to notice right away. I glanced over my shoulder to see the stall door ajar. I finished and zipped back up. When I turned around, I saw someone inside the stall, peering out at me. "What's your problem?" The stall door then opened fully, and out stepped a man wearing a black hoodie pulled down low, hiding most of his face. In his hands, he held an axe. It was one of those full-sized red fire axes. He then raised it over his head and charged at me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My instincts took over, and I bolted for the door, almost tripping over my own boots. I burst outside and headed straight for the scale house. The attendant must have saw me approaching, because he came out before I even got there. "What the hell?" he shouted. I pointed back at the restroom. "In there, there's some fucking lunatic with an axe. Are you fucking with me? 'Cause they'll revoke your CDL if this is a joke." "No, I'm not fucking with you, asshole. Go call the police." The attendant called it in and offered me a chair. I made sure to apologize for calling him an asshole after he got off the phone. The state troopers rolled up quick, lights flashing. They searched the entire station and the brush off the highway. They even checked under my trailer, like the guy might have been hiding there. They found nothing. My attacker vanished like smoke. There were no surveillance cameras at this location, but there was drug paraphernalia found in the bathroom stall he came out of. The troopers took my statement, said that they would look into local transients, but out there, in rural Texas, middle of nowhere, good luck. I sat in my cab until dawn, engine running, doors locked, shaking. I kept replaying it over and over in my head. This guy was doing drugs in the bathroom stall, and he attacked me with an axe when he heard me come in. If that guy working at the scale house had come in and wasn't paying attention, he might have had that axe get buried into his head. I never heard another word from the troopers, so I assume they never caught the guy. I've seen a lot of shit on the road over the years, been in arguments with hitchhikers. I've never picked one up, but sometimes they just like to invite themselves into the cab. I've seen 18-wheelers flip over, and have even had my truck buried in an avalanche in Colorado. But nothing puts the fear in you like seeing some deranged hooded man coming after you with an axe. To this day, I try to avoid going to way station restrooms alone at night if possible. If it's a simple drain, I just find the nearest bush. But if I have to take the Browns to the Super Bowl, I have no choice. In 1993, I was working for a truck rental company. Think U-Haul, but local to Georgia. We only had 3 locations: Griffin, Atlanta, and Savannah. I would often have to move box trucks from one location to another. Easy money, short runs, home most nights. That particular evening, I had to take a 24-foot box truck from the Griffin location up to the Atlanta depot. My boss told me, "You should take the back roads to avoid traffic. We're on a time crunch with this one." According to traffic reports, there was something going on in the city that night that caused the interstates to be backed up. The truck was assigned to be rented out the very next morning, which was unusual. But I remember that things were a bit hectic around this time, because we were competing with the corporate chains that were looking to set up shop in our territories. We fought the good fight, but ended up being absorbed by 1999. Anyways, it was late fall, already dark by 7 p.m. I got turned around somewhere off a GA 155. The roads became all twisty, no street lights, thick pines on both sides. I pulled over on the gravel next to a big stretch of woods to check the maps. This was long before the GPS smartphone days. As I was examining the map, something hit the hood of the truck like a gunshot. I jumped and looked out. I saw nothing at first. Then a brick sailed right through the passenger window, glass exploding inward, showering me. I looked up again. There was someone in the trees, maybe about 20 feet off the road, wearing a white porcelain mask, like those theater masks, but with no expression. He didn't say a word, and he had another brick ready to go, and cocked back his arm for another throw. As I put the truck back in the drive, a second masked figure appeared outside the broken window, hanging off the truck's frame. I floored it, tires spinning. As the truck went forward, the masked man tried opening the passenger door. I turned hard, going back in the opposite direction. The masked man yelled as I sent him tumbling into a ditch. I gunned it back down the way I came, taking another look into my rearview mirror one last time. There were now several figures standing in the road, 4, maybe 5, shoulder to shoulder, like statues, watching as I sped away. I didn't stop until I made it back to the highway, pulled into the first gas station I came across, glass crunching under my boots when I got out to talk to the clerk about calling the police. I told them everything, the masks, the brick being thrown, which was still in my cab, and the one who tried opening the door while I was speeding off. They sent units out, but of course, by the time they got back to that stretch of road, there was nothing there. Those woods were too thick to search at night. The cops took my report and said it sounded like kids playing a prank, or maybe a robbery setup gone wrong. That could be accurate for all I know, but something tells me there was something else going on out there. Multiple people wearing those blank porcelain masks. It felt coordinated, like they were waiting for someone to pull over. My boss was pissed about the damage to the truck, but was glad I was okay. I always wondered if it was some kind of cult back in those woods. Georgia had weird groups like that in the 90s, with satanic rituals and whatnot. Maybe they saw my headlights and decided that I was the offering for that night. Or maybe it was just bored locals messing with drivers. Either way, I never took the back roads again after that. And if I ever got turned around somewhere, I would pull over at a well-lit gas station or a truck stop to study the maps or ask for directions. I've been driving trucks for around 30 years. I've been all over the road since the late 90s, running Midwest routes mostly. Chicago to Detroit, Indy to Cleveland. You get the idea. These areas are mostly long, boring highways. I have the same routine every stop. Weigh in if needed, grab some food, check the tires, then hit the road. Nothing fancy, nothing scary. But one night around 2005, the routine was disrupted. I was somewhere off I-95 near Jackson, Michigan, hauling auto parts northbound. It was around 8 p.m. My stomach was growling after a long day on the road. I pulled into this little truck stop outside of Jackson. There was a couple of other rigs parked. I fueled up, weighed in, then parked in the back lot near the diner. I always make sure to lock the cab whenever I leave. I walked in the diner for a hot plate and a cup of coffee. The place was half empty. The waitress was chatting with some regulars. I just sat at the counter, checking my route maps. GPS wasn't fully integrated at this time, and I would say I was in there for around 45 minutes. I walked back out, unlocked my door, climbed in, and fired up the engine. Everything seemed normal. Sleeper curtain was half drawn like I had left it, and I eased out of the lot, merging onto the highway ramp, and got up to speed. I was about half a mile down the road when blue lights were flashing in my mirrors. A state trooper pulled me over. I had no idea why. I wasn't speeding, and my lights were good. I eased to the shoulder and killed the engine. The trooper walks up, flashlight in hand. "Good evening, sir. Is there someone with you?" I was confused by the question. No, officer. It's just me." That's when I heard it. From directly behind me, a soft whisper. Female voice, raspy and low. "Don't tell him I'm back here." I froze. My heart drops to my stomach, and my skin goes cold. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing was visible with a curtain, but I knew someone was back there. I didn't say a word at first. I just stared straight ahead, and the trooper notices my face change. "Is everything all right?" "No, there's someone right behind me." He steps back with one hand on his holster. "Okay, I need you to step down from the vehicle." I open the door and climb down. The trooper draws his sidearm and points it at the cab. "Whoever is in there, come out slowly, hands where I can see him." The curtain parts, and a woman climbs out. She was in her mid-30s, stringy hair, track marks on her arms. She came out with her hands up, eyes wide. She looked like your typical homeless drug addict, thin, jittery. I'm surprised I didn't smell anything while I was in there. The trooper cuffs her right there on the shoulder and radios it in. I'm standing off to the side, staring at my own truck like it's a stranger. They search her. No weapon, just a small bag with some clothes and a meth pipe, of course. She doesn't say much, mumbles something about being cold and needing a ride. The trooper asked her how she got in, and she shrugs. "The door was unlocked." But that was a lie. Someone saw her messing with the passenger side door while I was inside the diner. She slipped in and hid in the sleeper compartment. Thankfully for me, whoever saw her called the police. They took her away in the cruiser. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from a detective following up on the case. It turns out she was wanted for questioning in connection to a homicide that happened down in Jackson. Some guy was stabbed in a motel room a few days earlier. Her prints were found at the scene. She wasn't charged with a murder, but they were holding her because she knew something about what happened. She had a history, priors for theft, drugs, and prostitution, nothing violent. After the call, I sat in my motel room, staring up at the ceiling. She was right behind me the whole drive from the lot. She could have done anything. Grabbed the wheel, put a knife to my throat, anything, and I wouldn't have been able to stop it. Moving forward, I always checked the cab after every stop, opening the sleeper curtain, shining a light in the back, under the bunk, behind the seats, even if my cab was locked, and even if it's daytime. No exceptions. My name is Earl McTavish. I'm Canadian, and I would appreciate it if you didn't say A. Why would you write that down if you didn't want me to say it? I've been hauling freight up and down the Manitoba roads for about 5 years now. I'm not really the type who scares easy. Give me a full tank of gas, a thermos, and a clear highway, and I'm a happy camper. I'll hook in the Bluetooth and listen to some podcasts to pass the time. I've never been one to believe in cryptids, ghost stories, or anything supernatural, but after what happened to me last week, I've changed my tune. I was heading north out of Winnipeg. It was one of those pitch-black prairie nights. I've been driving since 4 in the morning. My tank was full, but I was gassed. My eyes were becoming heavy, shoulders kept locking up. I knew I had to pull over when the road started playing tricks on me. I would say this was around 2:30 a.m. I spotted an old blue sign for a decommissioned rest stop just north of St. Andrews. That place had been shut down for years. Had a real creepy vibe, with its boarded up windows, cracked asphalt, weeds pushing up through everything. I thought better to pull in there to catch a quick nap, rather than end up causing a pileup on the highway. So I eased my rig down the ramp and parked in the wide open parking lot. Not a minute later, I crawled into the back bunk and passed out. About 3 hours later, I woke up. The sun was coming up, but it was still dark and quiet. And I mean real quiet. I didn't even hear the natural sounds of the forest. It was very eerie out here. I got out of my cab and wanted to stretch my legs for a bit. So I decided to walk around the old rest stop building and get the blood flowing. I've driven by this place a couple times, and I've always wondered what it looked like on the inside. The entry door was already halfway open, and just kind of swinging there back and forth. I grabbed my big Maglite and wandered over. The inside smelled like mold and something sharp, like copper. I swept the light around. Some old vending machines, tipped over benches, wallpaper peeling off the walls. It looked like how you would expect it to. I kept advancing further, past the front desk, into a big open area that looked like it was a lounge area once upon a time. That's when I heard a voice. "Help me. Please. Somebody help me." I swung the flashlight toward the far corner. What I saw damn near made my heart stop on the spot. I don't know what the hell I was looking at, but it was tall, 9 or 10 feet, easily. It had gray skin pulled tight over muscle and bone, like it had been crudely sewn together. Picture 3 torsos stitched into each other side by side, like some kind of science experiment. It had multiple heads, 3 on top, and others embedded into its side. Dead eyes staring at me, mouths hanging open. There was one head right in the middle that kind of looked like a mutated bullfrog with rows of sharp teeth. I assumed one of its heads was whispering in that broken, desperate voice. "Please, it still hurts. Help me." Then, what looked like a woman's head on the left suddenly jerked up, her eyes locked right on mine, and she screamed. I couldn't move. I was floored by what I was seeing. Some kind of twisted abomination. The middle head then disappeared into its body as it got down on all fours. As it did, the faces on its side moaned in agony. It was the most disturbing thing I had ever seen in my life. The creature's flesh began rippling across its body, like something underneath was trying to push its way out. That finally kicked me into gear. I turned and ran like hell, boots pounding on the broken tiles, flashlight bouncing everywhere. I could still hear those wails and moans behind me. I burst out the front door and nearly ate dirt as I sprinted back to my truck. I didn't even close the cab door all the way. I just fired up the engine, slammed it into gear, and got the hell out of there. Gravel flying, tires spinning. I didn't let off the throttle until I was back on Highway 9, and that rest stop was long gone. Later, when my hands finally stopped shaking, I started thinking about all the people who have gone missing up and down that stretch of highway over the years. A father and son back in 2008. Their car found parked at an old pull-off, doors wide open. No sign of them. Or the young woman cyclist in 2014 who disappeared somewhere between Selkirk and Winnipeg. And those 3 loggers back in 2019. Truck left running, one boot lying on the grass, like they had got yanked right out of it. All of them real cases, never solved. I keep wondering, did all those missing people end up at that old rest stop? Did that thing I saw there collect them somehow? I don't know. A part of me is still coping. Maybe it was just a vivid nightmare I had while I was sleeping in my truck. Because if that thing is real, I can't even stomach the thought of someone being trapped inside of it, still begging for help. All I know is that I will never pull into that abandoned rest stop again. My routes will undoubtedly take me past there at some point, but I'll be sure to keep on rolling, no matter how tired I am.
I spent most of high school online, not in the way people do now where they mean Instagram or games or doom scrolling. I mean really online. Headphones, doors shut, house quiet, clock creeping past midnight while I fall into places that felt like they weren't meant to be found. I'd get home, dump my backpack, eat what was ever left on the counter, and then boot up my laptop like a full-blown addict. By the time my parents were in bed, I was already somewhere else, being somebody else, seeing things no other teenager should see. Back then, that somewhere else was 4chan. It was chaos, but it was interesting chaos, you know? Every board felt like a different neighborhood, each with its own rules, tone, and level of danger. Some were stupid, some were funny, some were genuinely creative. Others were like wandering into an alley that you knew better than to linger in. I liked those rabbit holes though. I liked the mysteries, ARGs, strange videos, unexplained images, threads that promised answers and then delivered nothing but deeper questions. It felt like being part of a secret internet club, one that didn't care if you were actually ready for what you were about to see. They were going to show you anyway. Shovel Dog? One Guy, One Jar? Worm Gush? I say these video file names and I know some of you are about to cringe, and I know you remember them too. There was one board though, one I never posted on, I only lurked in. Everyone knew its reputation. You didn't stumble onto it by accident. It was infamous even by 4chan standards, a place where people whispered about in other threads, a place you only visit late at night when the house is dark and you told yourself you were just looking. It was where the worst stuff floated from the bottom of the web. Not illegal exactly, not always, but close enough to make your stomach turn. You could see murder, death, and find the worst confessions you can ever imagine. Stuff I honestly will never share anywhere, anonymous or otherwise. I'm only there out of curiosity, I told myself, anthropological interest. And I think that's a lie everybody used. One night while scrolling through that board, I saw a thread that didn't quite fit, and anybody that lurked back then knows what I'm talking about. This board, when something was posted that didn't fit like the rest of the threads, it would stand out. Lurkers would notice, so we all kind of gathered. The thumbnail stopped me cold. It wasn't shocking, it wasn't graphic. That was the problem. It was just a photo. Two girls standing outside somewhere that looked like a schoolyard playground or some kind of park. They were smiling at the camera, backpacks on, hair pulled back. 5th or 6th grade, I think, maybe. Younger than me by a few years. That alone was weird, but the description was stranger. It said, "Like what you see?" I clicked on it. The post attached to the image was disgusting. Not explicit in a pornographic way. Worse than that, it was a written description of things that the poster claimed he wanted to do to them. Violent, degrading, predatory fantasies that were written with this smug confidence, like he wanted an applause. This was common for this board, people showing up with the shock value stuff and wanting a standing ovation from the rats and shock troopers looking for that kind of jolt. My chest went tight reading it. I remember glancing at the door to my room, half expecting somebody else to be standing there, watching me read it. I always felt that way when I came across something weird, this vague sense of guilt. The responses were mixed. A lot of people were furious, calling him out, telling him to delete himself, saying he was sick, saying this crossed a line even for that board. Others were clearly trolling, egging him on just to be cruel. They said the mods had gone to bed and it was time to post the good stuff. A few posts were worse, not many, but enough to make it stick in my head, enough to make me close the tab instead of replying. There were people singing his praise, telling him to go for it, for lack of better words. I kept reminding myself it had to be shock bait, somebody trying to get a rise out of other people. That happened all the time, literally every day. On the next night, I saw the thread again. Same image, but a different title. This time there were more photos. Not many, but enough to know this person had real access to these girls directly. Different angles, but same girls, same age. The descriptions had now escalated. Still written fantasies, but no actual acts shown. But the fixation was undeniable. The poster was not pretending. He was not practicing. He was arguing with people, calling them out, mocking them, claiming he knew these girls, claiming they were special. Every comment only escalated the whole fiasco, so again, all I did was observe until the thread timed out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Was this man hurting them right fucking now? What kind of world had I now tapped into? After that, though, it became routine. Every night, sometime after midnight, the thread would appear. Sometimes it was the same images, sometimes new ones. Sometimes the title was bait, something vague meant to lure people in. Other times it was just straight up blunt and aggressive. The comments grew angrier, more desperate, people begging him to stop, others trying to track the images. A few claimed they were reporting him, though we all knew it was a bluff. This image board was truly anonymous, and if something went against the guidelines, the mods would just simply delete it. They didn't investigate things like this. They just swept it under the rug. The poster never really seemed worried. That was another clue that we were totally and utterly powerless. Weeks went by and I checked less boards. I stopped clicking into random threads, but always looking for that one. Part of me hoped it wouldn't be there anymore. Part of me was afraid of what it meant if it was. As long as that disgusting thread was there, I could rest knowing it was just a daydream. The worst realization came quietly one night as I stared at that familiar photo and felt something settle in my gut. This was not somebody reposting random images from Google, a theory many of us had been offering up. This was some kind of sicko taking images off a friend's account and pretending they were kids he knew. Creepy, ultimate trolling type behavior. This, however, was somebody who did in fact have access to those girls. The image in question was the girls on a couch, facing the other direction, and at the bottom of the picture was this little piece of paper, and the paper said,
"Hi, insert image board name. Don't they look tasty?"
Followed by a time and a date. This predator was proving he was really in the house with these girls with a timestamp. I felt in my heart that we were circling the drain at this point. It was like watching a shark closing in. Every night, I was finding myself looking, making sure it hadn't escalated, that it was still there, that it was just words on a page confined to a screen. But the posts kept coming, and the tone kept shifting from provocation to confession. The guy stopped pretending he was just trolling, and he started talking like somebody who had already crossed a line in his head. He then began referring to himself as a stepfather.
"What kind of stepfather would I be if I didn't properly train these girls for womanhood? Do you think they'll still call me by name, or will they still call me stepdaddy? The best part is having them sit in my lap every night before bed. No one, not even their mom, suspects a thing."
I couldn't believe it. Comments about being trusted, about having keys, about how easy it was to take photos without being noticed. Then one night, he just said it outright, claimed the girls lived under the same roof, claimed their mother was clueless, claiming the posting itself was part of the thrill, that the act of sharing them or having strangers see what he saw made him feel powerful, perverse, and generous. That was when this thread exploded. People were calling for this man's execution. The casual cruelty vanished. Even the trolls seemed uneasy now. People weren't just insulting him, they were pleading, telling him to stop, telling him to delete the images, begging him to get help, to walk away while he still could. A few users even tried to reason with him, spelling out exactly how bad this would end for everybody involved. He would respond back with lulls, further threats until the thread timed out, and then he vanished for the night. He called them buzzkills, said they didn't understand how far gone he already was. He said there was no rewind button for his mind, talked about courage, and not in this moral sense, but like he was psyching himself up for something inevitable, something he framed as destiny instead of a crime. Reading this felt like standing next to a firing line at a gun range. It was hard to keep my eyes open. hard to even pay attention. I remember at one point my hands were shaking on the keyboard, hitting all kinds of keys, remembering feeling stupid for being scared, and sitting safely in my own bedroom while this played out somewhere else, but it didn't feel distant at all. It felt immediate and very, very real. Then, I got tagged in a comment one night, just before the thread timed out. I'd never even posted inside that creepy asshole's thread, never said a word. I didn't even have a consistent handle. Nobody did, just whatever the board assigned me that session, usually a random set of numbers, but somebody replied to one of the frantic comments and tagged several anonymous IDs, including mine, with a single line. "If you're serious about stopping this, go here." It was a link to another thread, different board, totally hidden from prying eyes. Quieter and no shock images, no bait titles, just screenshots, timestamps, and people breaking down what little information they had. Somebody had archived the post before they were deleted. Someone else was comparing image compression artifacts. Another was speculating about time zones based about when the thread went live and when the guy went to sleep. They were even analyzing his speech and typing style through words and writing that he produced. Halfway down the thread was another link, and this one led to a chat room. I hesitated. It felt like crossing a line from observer to now participant, from doom scrolling to responsibility. But once I clicked in, there's no dramatic reveal, no manifesto, just a handful of usernames already talking, lines of text stacking up in front of me. There were maybe 10 of us at first. A guy who claimed to work IT support and knew basic networking. A woman who said she'd done moderation work on other platforms, understood the basic website tag-in and tag-out protocols. Somebody else who admitted they had no technical skills at all but was good at organizing information and keeping timelines straight. A few lurkers watching, just like I'd been. There was no leader and no head hero. That surprised me. It was just a collective of people that were sick of watching that guy threaten children. Everyday folks like you and me that were ready to put down their entire lives to stop this from happening. There was nervous humor, sure, people making dumb jokes to cut out the tension. Somebody joked about how none of us would be here if we had healthier hobbies. Somebody else called it the worst project group imaginable. And I'll admit it helped somehow. Made it feel human instead of apocalyptic. And it also fueled our morale and our camaraderie. We wanted to be there. We wanted to work together for this common goal. And the purpose was crystal clear. We were there to identify the poster, to figure out who he really was, where he was, and how to hand that information to somebody who could actually intervene. Nobody talked about revenge. Nobody talked about confronting him directly. The goal was simple: stop him. And the easiest way to do that would be to find out his identity, then hand it over to the police. So we started small, tracking post times, comparing language patterns, noting the way he referred to the girls, the consistency of his phrasing. Somebody pointed out the photos always seemed to be taken indoors, under similar lighting. Somebody else noticed a logo on the backpack in one of the images and started digging into various business brandings. Maybe there would be something local to clue us in. I felt energized now in a way that actually kind of scared me. This was no longer morbid curiosity, it was purpose. I'd gone from helplessly watching something horrible unfolding in front of me to being part of a group that believed, maybe naively, that we could interrupt, and that belief was intoxicating. Underneath all of it was this pressure, questions from my parents, my friends, realizations from the team about what could possibly and potentially happen to us. Because if we were wrong, we're wasting our time. But if we're right, every minute mattered. By the third night, we all understood the same grim truth at the same time. We weren't going to crack him on 4chan. Every theory about IP leaks, bad OPSEC, or accidental metadata collapsed under scrutiny. The post jumped regions, time zones shifted. If there was a real location bleed, it was buried beneath layers of obfuscation, or worse, the anonymity was working exactly as it intended. The board was doing what it had always done, protecting monsters by accident. Meanwhile, his posts were escalating. Not in detail, he seemed to relish withholding now, but in confidence. He talked less about fantasy and more about inevitability, about waiting for the right moment, about how people like us didn't understand how easy it would be to cross that line once you've already stepped over it inside your head.
Their mom isn't going to be home this Friday. Maybe I can get them to fall asleep with me in the living room. We can all stay together under the blankets, get comfy. Maybe I'll put on a scary movie so they stay close. Keep a hand on me. Little will they know.
We felt the clock ticking. The breakthrough didn't come from clever hacking or technical genius. It came from desperation. Someone in chat typed what we'd all been avoiding. We need him off 4chan. That was it. That was the move. If we couldn't trace him there, we'd lure him somewhere else that was actually traceable. Somewhere permanence existed. Somewhere with real accounts, real handles, and actual data. Reddit was our first suggestion. We moved instantly. Within hours, we'd spun up a subreddit. Ugly, grimy, intentionally off-putting. It wasn't explicit, but it suggested the worst. Curated creepypasta, disturbing art, threads framing as confessions and dark thoughts. We created burner accounts, populated it until it looked lived in, rotten, a place he'd feel at home. We even created some DIY, home-cooked content that fell in line with his stuff, something to make him feel right at home even more. Then would come the hardest part, talking to him. And for some stupid reason, I volunteered. Back on his thread, I adopted a tone. I mirrored his language, complimented his honesty, told him I understood the thrill of sharing, of being seen out in the open. Every word tasted like ash, but I typed it anyway. I let him lead, let him think that he was in control.
Oh my, a man of culture. Have you actually tasted the fruit?
He asked me. Of course, wouldn't comment otherwise. A better question, how haven't you had a little taste yourself, with such delightful apples in your basket?
I know. I struggle to cross over and take the plunge. Soon though, that's all I can say.
We went on back and forth like that for 20 minutes, and I wanted to puke the entire time. When I mentioned the subreddit, I framed it as a gift. Less noise, less judgment, people who actually get it. He hesitated. You could feel it in the pacing of his replies, shorter sentences, longer pauses. He asked me questions about moderation, about rules, about who ran it, and I answered carefully, letting others in the chat feed me lines. We were so close it felt unreal. And then he vanished. No reply, no goodbye. He stopped replying, and the thread timed out within 15 minutes. Maybe he'd gone to bed and was thinking it over. Tomorrow we'd see a Reddit account pop up and this would all be worth it. But instead, a new post appeared. One last image. It wasn't shocking, it wasn't explicit, it was mundane. And that's what broke us. One of the girls was wearing a middle school gym shirt, big blocky letters, school name, year, current. It was wrinkled and partially obscured, but when we realized what it was that we were actually looking at, everybody jumped in to solve the puzzle. The chat room was quiet, then exploded with message after message, all caps framed with exclamation marks. We were freaking the fuck out, dude. I can't even properly express it. That was the crack in the dam. We fucking got him. We zoomed, cropped, enhanced, cross-referenced. Within an hour, somebody had the school's website open, class rosters, event photos, newsletters. It didn't take long. And then there the girls were, smiling in a group photo, a lot younger than what they looked like on that cursed board. We found the families next, and that part felt really weird, intrusive, almost dangerous. None of us really wanted to be the creep who cold contacted a parent with accusations pulled from the internet, so we didn't. Instead, we documented everything. Screenshots, archived threads, timelines, commentary explaining the pattern, the escalation, the claims of access. We wrote like we were building a case because I guess in a way, we were. Clear and clinical, impossible to misunderstand. And then somebody called the school. Not anonymously, calmly and carefully. We explained what we had, what we feared, and why time mattered. We didn't have the poster's identity, but we knew the names of the girls, and we were hoping they could backtrack from there. An administrator asked for the materials. We sent the portfolio to an official school email account, and after that, things moved fast. The school contacted the mother contacted the police. The police had already enough to act. The man, her boyfriend, was living in the home, exactly like he claimed. He was taken from work the next day, charged, booked, removed. The thread never came back. No manifesto, no retaliation, just silence. A complete vacuum where a potential pedophile had once existed. Weeks later, one of us found a local news blurb confirming an arrest. He was nowhere near any of us, but we got his first name, his mugshot. We got our guy, you know? I remember sitting back from the screen, heart pounding, feeling something that I did not expect. Relief, satisfaction. I'd done that, goddammit. What started as a sick curiosity, something I'd stumbled into while lurking too late at night, ended with a real-world consequence, actual protection, proof that even in the worst corners of the internet, people could choose to act and make an actual difference. This was before the documentaries like Don't Mess with Cats, which I was also oddly involved with. This was before vigilante justice became content, before anybody was clapping at a phone screen. We didn't feel like heroes, we just felt human. And I guess sometimes that's all you need. I'm from the Pennsylvania wilds. If you're not familiar, it covers nearly a quarter of the state, miles of dense hardwood forest, logging roads, state game lands, and towns so small they barely register on a map. It's rural in a way that feels older than the highways that are cutting through it. At night, it's black enough to swallow headlights whole. I've lived here my entire life. When I was a kid, one of my cousins told me there were weird people in these woods. Not hunters, not hikers, weird people who only come out at night. Another cousin from the same area said something similar but claimed they were part of a cult and wore these strange masks. I looked into it years later. Of course, there's no records, no cult reports, nothing local that would back it up. I figured they had to be messing with me. Until last year. I left work for early that morning, just past 3. The hours feel suspended. No traffic, no movement. Just the road, the trees, pressing in tightly on both sides. And that particular morning was clear and dry. No fog, no rain, just me in the dark. I was driving a stretch of back road that runs between 2 heavy sections of forest when something stepped out of the woods on the right side. I slowed automatically, thinking deer. People had accidents out here all the time. But it wasn't shaped like a deer. My headlights washed the shoulder in that dull yellow light that lets you see just enough. The gravel, the grass, the lower trunks of trees, everything beyond that fades into black. Between 2 trees just off the road stood something tall and unnaturally thin. It was man-shaped, but only in shape. I can't describe it. It's like it was presenting itself as a man. Long limbs, lengthy like a stretched rubber toy. It was the same lightish brown gray all over, almost like bark. For a second, I thought it might actually really be a person, but we were miles from anything. The thought then flashed through my mind. Is this guy naked out here? Then it raised its arm and waved. Slow and casual, but unmistakable. And that's when I got a really good look at its face. The eyes were dark, sunken in black. The mouth, or what I thought was the mouth, was nearly a foot long. It seemed to extend further down the face than it should have. Maybe it was shadows, it's hard to say, but it felt like a smile, and it matched that weird waving arm. The second I registered it, something in me shut down the curiosity. I snapped my eyes back to the road and slammed my foot on the gas. I did not look back. I refused to. By the time I reached work, I convinced myself it was a dead tree, a strange stump. Headlights can warp shapes and your brain will fill in the gaps. That explanation felt good enough for me. On my way home that afternoon, I pulled over near that area where I'd seen it, expecting to find that weird tree in particular and just laugh at myself. But there was no tree, just an abandoned, overgrown logging road branching off into the woods. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking. Grass was growing thick down the center, brush reclaiming every single inch. Nothing that matched what I'd seen, and there were these really weird tracks out there, wandering in and out of the forest. Still, I forced myself to accept the trick of the light theory. It was more believable than the alternative. Months would pass, then late fall would roll in, leaves mostly down, the woods looking skeletal as they do. One evening, I was home listening to this paranormal podcast about something they called the Tall Whites. I'd nearly tuned it out until the host mentioned the sighting happened in the next county over from me. A story came from a retired park ranger. About 20 years ago, while on patrol at night, he saw a tall, thin humanoid figure standing between trees along the forested road. light brown or gray, extremely long limbs. He said it had small red eyes, but he'd shine a flashlight directly at it. An eye shine can distort color at night. He also mentioned what looked like a really long nose, or what he thought was a long nose, perhaps a mouth. It was hard to say. My stomach dropped immediately. The proportions that he described were nearly identical to the ones I saw. The stillness, the way it stood just inside the tree line, watching with its creepy big face. If what I saw was only headlights playing tricks, how did somebody describe almost the same exact thing 2 decades earlier? The differences were minor, but the shape, the height, the build was all a direct match. And the location, deep woods, back roads, places most people never travel at 3 in the morning, reminded me of that missing 411 thing. I started thinking back about what my cousins had told me when I was a kid about those weird people off in the woods, masked figures. Maybe they'd seen something like that and tried to make sense of it the only way that kids can. Or maybe stories just grow up in places like this, and I think you see why. I haven't told many people about what I saw. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. A tall gray brown man thing waving from between the trees at 3 a.m. I mean, come on. But I know what I saw was not a deer. It wasn't a stump, and it wasn't random. It lifted its arm. It acknowledged me. Now when I drive that stretch of road, I don't slow down for anything.
The night of April 13th, 1973, started like every girl's prom night should. At the time, I was 17, a junior in high school, in a small town in Kansas. I had spent that entire afternoon in front of a mirror in my bedroom, getting ready. I was super nervous and excited. I wanted things to go well with my date, David. He showed up right on time, driving his dad's pickup, and politely introduced himself to my parents. He looked sharp in his rented tux. We then drove to the prom after promising my father that I'd be back by 10:30. Our prom was being held in our school's gymnasium. The place was decked out with paper stars hanging from the ceiling, a spinning disco ball, popular during that era, and a live band playing Elton John cover songs. Everyone was there, cheerleaders, football players, and even the misfits who sat in the back of the class. David and I danced to the first few songs, laughing together as he stepped on my toes. But the good times didn't last long. You see, David was normally a good guy when he was sober. But after he came back from hanging out with a couple of his buddies near the back, his eyes were already glassy. His breath was sharp with whatever had been in the flask they had snuck in. He pulled me toward one of the side hallways, saying that he wanted to talk. The hallway was dim, lined with folding chairs and extra decorations. He backed me against the wall, hands on my waist. "Come on, babe," he slurred, leaning in close. I pushed him away. "No, David, stop." When he didn't listen, I slapped him across the face, hard. His expression then twisted in anger. "I knew I was wasting my time with you. You can find your own fucking ride home." He then stormed off toward the parking lot. I stood there, shaking, tears welling up in my eyes. The music kept thumping through the walls like nothing had happened. I didn't want to go back out to the dance floor, looking like I had been crying. So I headed for the restroom. However, the main hallway ones were out of order. So instead of going to the ones attached directly to the gym, I went further down the hall, to the locker rooms. It was quiet back there. The music seemed to fade away the closer I got to the door. Once inside, the atmosphere was very tense. I could tell something was wrong. I then noticed something on the floor, near the bathroom stalls. Since it was dark, I couldn't tell what it was until I got closer. It was a trail of blood that began near one of the lockers leading to one of the bathroom stalls at the far end, like someone had been dragged across the floor. At first, I remember thinking that a girl student might be having some trouble with her lady parts. Hello? Is someone in there? Are you okay?" I was met with silence, but then the stall door began slowly creaking open. Before I could say anything else, a figure wearing a bright yellow rain poncho stepped out. In his right hand, he held a long, serrated knife. Without a word, the assailant charged at me. I bolted, running toward the exit. I felt the blade cut my left arm, but I didn't stop as I shoved through the door, screaming as I burst back onto the dance floor, clutching my bleeding arm. Everyone was staring at me. I spotted our principal near the chaperone table and pushed through the crowd to get to him. "Help! There's someone in the locker room. He attacked me." The rest of that night is a bit of a blur for me. The loss of blood and the shock caused me to pass out. I remember waking up later in a hospital room next to my mother. From talking with some of my friends, after I passed out, the band stopped playing, and the principal grabbed a microphone, asking for someone to call the police and for all the students to exit the gym in an orderly fashion. The police arrived a short time later. They searched the entire building, locker rooms, showers, hallways, even the parking lot. But the man in the poncho was gone. No body, no knife, just a trail of blood pooling in the bathroom stall. By morning, the news hit. A senior girl named Melissa was missing. She had been seen leaving the dance early, upset, heading toward the back of the building. No one saw her after that. Search parties combed the entire area for days. The local parks, nearby creeks, even the railroad tracks. But she was never found. Many years later, I read about a man named John Henry Horton. He was a custodian at Shawnee Mission East High School, which is in the next county over from the school I attended. Horton had been arrested for murdering a female student back in 1974. I felt ice rushing down my veins. The photos from his trial showed an older man, heavier, graying, but his eyes looked familiar to me. I'm convinced it was him who attacked me in the locker room back in 1973. The police have never connected it officially, and I feel horrible that I can't even remember the missing girl's last name. But as far as I'm aware, she was never found, and John Henry Horton was only ever convicted for murdering 13-year-old Elizabeth Wilson. September 11th, 2001 is a day that went down in history for not only America, but for the entire world. Even here in Canada, we felt the impact of that event. But personally, that day stands out for an entirely different reason. At the time I was 12 years old, living in the Alberta countryside, where the biggest excitement was spotting a moose on the back roads. I'd woken up that day and decided that I didn't want to go to school. So I put on a severe cough and rubbed my eyes extra hard to make them look puffy. Then I told my mom I was feeling sick. She bought it, probably because Dad was out of town, and she had her hands full at the pharmacy she was working at. I stayed in bed until I heard her car leaving the driveway. As soon as she was gone, I slipped on my boots and jacket, then snuck out the back door. The woods behind our neighborhood stretched on for miles. I've explored them hundreds of times before, building forts and pretending I was the Canadian Indiana Jones, eh? That morning, I figured I'd hike up the old creek bed, maybe skip some rocks. I must have wandered further than usual, following a deer trail that twisted deeper into the thicket. The trees got denser, blocking out the sun. Everything became quiet. Too quiet. No birds chirping. No squirrels rustling. That's when I saw them. A series of tents. Not the colorful camping ones you would see at the park. These were big, white, industrial looking, like the ones you see in disaster movies. They were clustered together in a clearing, maybe a dozen of them, with thick plastic sheeting and metal frames, hoses snaked between them, connected to generators humming low. It looked like a makeshift quarantine site. Curious, I crept closer, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. There were these crates stacked outside one tent, labeled with words that I didn't understand. A weird smell hung in the air, like bleach mixed with something rotten. I peeked around the tree, and that's when I saw them. 2 men in full hazmat suits, the kind with hoods and masks. They were hauling a heavy bag between them. One of them turned to look at me. All 3 of us froze in place. Then I heard muffled shouting. They then dropped the bag and reached for their waists, pulling out handguns. The first shot cracked through the air, splintering bark off the tree beside me. I yelped, ducking low as another bullet whizzed past, thudding into the dirt. Panic overwhelmed me. I bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. My lungs burned, legs pumping as fast as I could. More shots rang out behind me. I ran until my sides ached. I collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping, tears streaming down my face. I hid there for hours, shaking, until the sun started dipping low. I then made my way back home. Later on, when Mom came back, I didn't say a word. How could I? Beside the fact that she would have been upset about me being out in the forest when I should have been sick in bed. What happened in New York that day had her glued to the TV. It sounded crazy, even to me. That night, as I laid in bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying it all in my mind, the tents, the suits, the guns, I overheard my mom on the phone in the living room. She was talking to my dad. "Yeah, I heard about it when I was at work. Just awful. James stayed home today because he was feeling sick." After talking to my dad for a while longer, she mentioned something very strange. Apparently she passed about 8 garbage trucks going the opposite way on the 2-lane highway that leads directly to our neighborhood. The only other thing that way is a public park. Dump sites aren't anywhere near this area. A chill crawled up my spine. 8 garbage trucks coming from the direction of the woods? Years later, I tried to look into it, but nothing ever came up. No reports, no investigations, nothing. The only thing anyone was interested in back then was the attack on the World Trade Center. I am in no way suggesting that what I encountered in the woods had anything to do with that event. I'm not really sure what the hell was going on back there, but it was important enough to shoot at a kid and then pack everything up into garbage trucks and leave as quickly as possible. My name is Maddie. This story takes place when I was around 12 or 13. I've listened to this channel for years, but I never thought I would actually sit down and write out what happened to me. I'm from a fairly well-known small town in New Jersey. Growing up, I went through all the typical fangirl phases: Big Time Rush, Justin Bieber, One Direction, 5 Seconds of Summer, but the band that I was completely obsessed with at the time was Why Don't We? My mom has always been the super involved type. She tends to get into whatever I'm into, so she started listening to their music as well. As a surprise, my mom and dad saved up and bought tickets to see the group perform at the Radio City Music Hall in New York City. I was ecstatic. I picked out my outfit, which was a band t-shirt with pink denim shorts. I could barely contain myself. When the day came, I was scrambling to get ready. 13-year-old me genuinely believed one of the boys would spot me in the crowd of millions of girls and fall in love. We lived about 2 hours away, without traffic, and since my mom hates driving into the city, we decided to take the bus instead. We were already running late. The bus stop was about 25 minutes from our house, so we sped there, blasting Why Don't We songs along the way, laughing and singing together. We arrived just in time and rushed on board. Because we were the last ones on, all the seats were taken except the last 2 rows, and I took the window while my mom sat in the aisle seat. As the bus was about to pull out, I suddenly caught a horrible stench creeping in from the front. I looked up and saw a ragged man, maybe in his late 60s or early 70s. His clothes were filthy and torn, and he carried a plastic bag that seemed to be adding to the smell. He looked homeless, and when he smiled, I saw his teeth, yellow, broken, and rotting. Since the bus was full, the only available seat left was directly behind my mom and I. As he walked down the aisle, his eyes scanned the passengers, then locked on me. Now, I've always been a true crime junkie, even as a kid, so the second he stepped on the bus, I was on high alert. I noticed where he sat, right behind me, and I couldn't help but glance back at him. He must have noticed, because our eyes met. Something in his expression changed. He then leaned toward my mom's ear. "Your daughter is so beautiful. I'm going to marry her when we get off this bus," he whispered. My stomach turned. I felt his hand gripping the seat behind me, his fingers tightening until the metal creaked. I only had one earbud in, but I heard every word. My mom froze. What could she even do? She's only 4'11". We exchanged a quick glance, and she shook her head, silently telling me not to react. We whispered about how creepy it was, and decided just to ignore him. She asked for one of my AirPods to tune out his disgusting comments. For a while, he just muttered to himself, and we tried to push it out of our minds, focusing on the excitement of the concert. Halfway through the ride, my mom pulled out her phone to take selfies of us. She literally takes pictures of everything. She's the kind of person that would take pictures of a rock. But as she held the phone up, I noticed something at the top of the screen. The man had leaned forward, practically pressing his face between our seats to get in the picture. I panicked and tried to whisper a warning, but before I could, my mom saw him on the screen and yelped. She shot up from her seat. The man just sat there, laughing this awful, manic laugh. While the nearby passengers turned to look, I remember feeling frozen, terrified for both of us, and even for the woman who was sitting across from him. He eventually stopped laughing and sank back into his seat, mumbling under his breath. No one said a word. They never do. And my mom and I just sat there, tense and silent. I texted her instead of speaking, telling her how scared I was, and she replied telling me to stay calm and just ignore him for a while longer. 15 minutes later, I started to relax more. We hadn't heard anything from the man behind us. That was until I felt something hot on the right side of my neck. I jerked forward and looked back. The man was leaning so close that his face nearly touched the gap between the seats. "Your daughter is so perfect. I'm going to have a family with her." My mom spun around and stood up, her voice shaking, but was loud enough for the whole bus to hear. "She's only 12 years old. Leave her alone, and don't speak to us again." For a second, I thought I was going to lunge at her, but thankfully he didn't. He just sank back down, now silent. When we finally neared our stop, I felt a wave of relief. I thought it was over. As people began filing off the bus, my mom and I had our stuff ready. We were immediately expecting to hop off. But right before we did, I felt him lean in close again, his voice low and disturbingly cheerful. "As soon as we get off this bus, I'm going to rape your daughter." I felt every drop of blood drain from my body. I couldn't breathe. My mom's face went pale in pure terror. I started praying in my head, even though I'm not very religious. I just wanted to get out of there. As soon as there was enough space between us and him, we booked it. We ran off that bus as fast as we could and sprinted down the street, desperate to disappear into the crowd. We ducked into a nearby boutique store, crouching behind the racks of clothing. Through the glass, we saw him limping down the sidewalk, peering into the windows, searching for us. When he looked into our store, I held my breath, but thank God he didn't spot us. We waited another 15 minutes before slipping out and finding a security guard who walked us the rest of the way. The rest of the night went by without seeing him again, but the fear has stayed with me ever since. To any young girls hearing this, please be aware of your surroundings. I used to listen to scary stories thinking, that could never happen to me, but it did. It can happen to anyone. I've been a long-time listener and a huge fan of your channel. I wanted to share a true story from my junior year of college during the COVID-19 lockdowns when campuses were letting only a handful of students back in. But since I was an RA, I was chosen to return. The campus was mostly desolate, but I didn't mind it. My school owns a stretch of forest where the trails began on private property, but eventually fed into public pathways. To avoid feeling trapped in my dorm, I would go for long walks there. It was winter, and the trails were frozen. A river ran alongside the walking trail, its surface sealed over with ice. The trails were typically empty, and I would usually have my headphones in, music blasting. But I still tried to stay aware of my surroundings. After all, I'm an avid horror story listener. I don't know exactly how long the trail is, but toward the end, there's a bench. During the springtime, students would gather there to swim. For me, the bench served more as a landmark. It meant that the trail was about to get more narrow and elevated, with the river running stronger beside it. Even during winter, you could still see the water moving beneath the thin layer of ice. The trail eventually ended in a parking lot, and as I got closer, I saw someone. At first, there was nothing unusual about him. He looked to be normal, maybe late 30s, early 40s, white, with a beanie, denim jeans, and a light-colored jacket on. Nothing about his appearance screamed dangerous in the moment, but the second I saw him, my stomach tightened. Something in me just reacted out of pure instinct. I didn't want to be near this person, alone, on an isolated trail. So I discreetly lowered my music and kept moving toward the lot. He passed me, and I let out a quiet sigh of relief. Perhaps I was just talking myself into a worst-case scenario. Since I had to walk back the same way I came, I waited for a while so the man could get far enough ahead so I wouldn't end up right behind him. When I finally started walking again, I kept my pace slow. I told myself I was overthinking this whole ordeal. Too many horror stories in my head. But everything changed when I got back to the bench. He was sitting there, seemingly waiting for me. This was the middle of winter, freezing cold, and he was just sitting there. I didn't say anything to him. I just kept moving forward, but after a short while, I risked a casual glance over my shoulder. My stomach dropped. He was now walking behind me. I still had a long way to go before I'd reach the campus, and all I could think was, I can't run. Running would only alert him that I knew he was following me. Plus, the trail is covered in frost. If I tried to sprint, I might slip, and then I'd be done for. So instead, I quickened my pace, forcing myself not to look back too much. Normally, I carried either my X-Acto blade or my heavy hydro flask for protection. But on that day, of course, I had left both behind. I cursed myself under my breath. Sometimes there would be other people on the trail, but since this was a lockdown period, it was just me and him. No one else. I debated calling campus security or even a friend, but all I could do was focus on just making it back. I think my stalker noticed I was picking up pace, because when I glanced back again, he let out this low chuckle. That sound made me shiver, more so than the cold weather. I was nearing the campus portion of the trail when I saw a woman with a huge dog coming in the opposite direction. I can't describe the relief that washed over me. I was ready to tell her that the man was following me and that she should go get some help or sick her dog on him. But when I turned around once more, he was gone. Just like that, out of thin air. I didn't waste any time. There were 3 separate entrances from the campus to the trail, and I darted up the closest one, cutting straight for the dorms. Even as I walked back to my room, I kept glancing over my shoulder, my nerves still on edge. Honestly, if that woman and her dog hadn't shown up, I think he would have continued following me, and if he hadn't made a move, I don't think I could have done much about it. Once inside, I called the campus security, trying to report a strange man on campus, but they just brushed it off and said that they would send someone to go check it out, and then hung up without even asking for a description. The scariest part of this was the feeling of being trapped, not being able to run, knowing that he was right behind me. When I called my parents and told them, they just scolded me, telling me that I shouldn't be walking in the woods alone. Young girls go missing all the time in those situations. Funny enough, that didn't stop me from going back on the trails. But after that day, I never left without my X-Acto blade in my pocket. I've attached a short video showing what the frozen path and river looked like that winter, as well as a photo I took at the end of the trail in the parking lot. I only recently realized that the photo actually captures the man who ended up following me. Though he's tiny and blurry, you can spot him if you zoom in close enough. When I was 15, I was a bit of a daredevil and was full of that dumb teenage bravado. Living in a small town in Iowa, it got really boring sometimes. So all it took was a simple dare from one of my friends to spend the night at the local bowling alley, to have me sneaking up one of the drop ceiling tiles in the men's restroom, waiting until the place emptied out, then drop down to explore the empty building, like some kind of urban explorer. This would have been around 2005. I knew if I went through with it, rumors would begin to circulate around school, and I would be the cool kid for a while. As pathetic as that sounds, that was our version of clout in those days. We picked a Friday night. As I mentioned before, the entry point was the men's restroom. The ceiling tiles above one of the stalls popped loose easily enough. I had scoped it out during open bowling night the week before. I shimmied up with a small flashlight and crawled onto a wooden platform by the AC ducting and waited. The leagues ran late that night, but by 11 p.m., the last stragglers were gone. The lights were dimmed, and the place became as quiet as a tomb. When I didn't hear any more footsteps, music, or people talking, I pried the tile aside and lowered myself down. I came out of the restroom to an empty building. It was dead quiet. My heart was beating out of my chest because I wasn't entirely sure if all the employees had gone home yet, so I cautiously made my way down the lanes, slowly. After walking down the length of the building and just kind of stood there for about 10 minutes, I figured I was alone. I didn't hear anything. So then I started to get a little cocky and headed toward the back, past the vending machines, through the door marked employees only, which led to the machines behind the lanes. I had always wondered what they looked like. The pen setter room was narrow and hot. I shined my flashlight around and saw a bunch of metal arms and chains. pretty underwhelming, to be honest. But that's when I saw something. There was a tall shape standing motionless by the emergency exit. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, but then it moved. I didn't expect anyone to be back there, so I had made it no effort to conceal myself. The figure stepped into my light. It was a man, wearing a dark jacket, and I saw in his hand he was holding a single bowling pin by the neck, like a club. I froze. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. When he took another step toward me, I bolted. I ran back through the door, across the open floor. I could hear him behind me, his boots thudding against the ground. "I'll fucking kill you," he shouted. I didn't look back. I just sprinted toward the restrooms. Thankfully, there was also a bar and a dining area near where the restrooms were. From his vantage point, he wouldn't be able to tell which one I had fled to once I rounded the corner. However, I saw a row of wooden stools against the wall. I grabbed one of the stools and hurled it toward him as hard as I could. It caught him in the leg, causing him to fall, and he went down hard. I didn't wait to see if he got back up. I sprinted into the men's room, yanked open the stall door, and hauled myself back into the ceiling, the tile snapping back into place just as I heard the restroom door burst open. I could hear him below me, pacing, muttering. At first, it was just heavy breathing. Then he spoke. "I'm gonna find you. I'll bash your head in." I pressed myself flat, barely breathing. Dust got in my nose and I had to stop myself from sneezing. The next thing the man said was disturbing. "You killed her. I know you killed my daughter. She was right here. And you took her from me." My blood went cold. Daughter? I didn't know what he was talking about. I hadn't killed anyone. He kept going on like that, voice rising and falling, like he was arguing with himself. "You'll pay for it. I'm gonna make you pay." He then banged the pen against the stall doors, one by one. Then, silence. The minutes dragged on. After maybe an hour, there was nothing. I had no idea if he was still down there waiting for me. I had a pretty good spot on the wooden platform, but I couldn't move without making noise. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep right there. I woke up to voices coming from below. The employees were coming in for the morning leagues. I waited for another hour, listening until the place was busy, balls rolling, pins crashing, announcements over the speakers, etc. I carefully slid the tile aside again, making sure the coast was clear, before dropping down. I washed my face real quick to hide how wrecked I looked, and slipped out the side exit into the parking lot. No one batted an eye at me. I told my friends the full story, but no one believed me. They just thought I was trying to make my night in the bowling alley sound more exciting than it was. Two of my friends were with me when I crawled up into the ceiling, and then hung around until closing time. So they believed that I did go through with the dare, but not the part about the maniac with the bowling pin. When I think back to that night, that man's disturbing murmuring still gives me the fucking creeps. "You killed her. You killed my daughter." I don't know who he thought I was, but I'm okay with never finding out. I would hate to end this story like a corny urban legend, and I know it's been like 20 years, but a part of me still wonders if that man still visits that place when the lights go out, waiting in the back room with a bowling pin in his hand. I grew up in Antioch, California, and used to play football in high school. I had planned on making a career out of it, until I had a severe knee injury where my bone was forced out of the socket. Even after I rehabilitated, it was never the same, and it effectively ended my football aspirations. That's when I took up competitive bowling and eventually joined a league. We would often meet up at Delta Bowl and play 3 or 4 games. We would usually wrap things up around 10:30. On the night of December 7th, 2024, we had another league night and things went well. We did hear some loud arguing happening from one of the other lanes, but it had nothing to do with us. By 10:30, the place was emptying out fast. I grabbed my bag, zipped up my jacket, and pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot. My car was halfway down the row. As I was walking towards it, I heard voices rising sharp from the far end, near the perimeter fence. I saw someone in a hoodie standing next to a parked SUV. The man was yelling at someone in the car, sounding like he was threatening violence, and it looked like things were about to get ugly. I didn't stop to listen. It's none of my business. Then a loud pop came from that direction. My stomach dropped, along with the rest of me. More shots rang out. My heart was pounding so loud, it drowned everything else out. I stayed flat for another full minute. When all fell silent, I risked standing. My legs felt like jelly. I saw the hooded man from earlier, lying face down with a gun in his hand. The police showed up a short time later. The shooting was a result of an attempted robbery, which soon turned into a full-blown shootout. I'll paste an excerpt from a local news article about the incident. On the night of December 7th, 2024, a fatal gun battle occurred in the parking lot of the Delta Bowl in Antioch, California, resulting in the death of 2 men. Around 10:35 p.m., Antonio Drake, 34, was sitting in the driver's seat of his vehicle, preparing to leave the bowling alley, when DeAndre Reed, 35, approached Drake's vehicle. Investigators later determined Reed was attempting to rob Drake. An exchange of gunfire ensued between the 2 men. Both were fatally wounded in the encounter. There is no prior connection. Surveillance videos and evidence indicate that Drake and Reed did not know each other and had no conflict while inside the bowling alley. The Antioch Police Department classified the incident as an isolated attempted robbery because Drake was firing in response to being robbed. His shooting of DeAndre Reed is considered an act of self-defense, justifiable homicide. End of excerpt. It's interesting to me that several of the articles written about this case make this sound like it was a one-on-one isolated incident. The part about them having no conflict while inside the bowling alley is not true. News reports on television told a different version of events. The confrontation began inside the building, between 2 groups. Drake was a part of Group A, and Reed was a part of Group B. They were apparently bowling next to each other when an argument broke out between the 2 groups. When it was time to leave, Reed then followed Drake to his car and tried to rob him. That's when the gunfire broke out. I was there that night, and I did hear the arguing coming from a few lanes down from us, and I personally saw Reed standing next to the SUV, shouting at who I assumed to be Drake, the driver. This is yet another case of senseless violence that has been escalating around here. The locals used to consider the bowling alley to be a safe haven from the violence that has plagued our streets. Not anymore.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to read my story. I've been sitting on my experience for some time now, and finally decided to share it. Just don't use my real name, okay? It was my niece's 8th birthday party at a place called Tampa Lanes, back when it was still open. It must have been one of the last big events there before everything shut down for good. We had a lane reserved right in the middle of the building, and I was there helping wrangle my niece and her friends, trying to get on their bowling shoes. That's when I first got this very uncomfortable feeling. There was this guy sitting alone at one of the lane tables besides us, wearing a dark jacket, face half hidden in shadow, just staring at me. I caught his gaze once and looked away fast, thinking maybe he was waiting for someone, but every time I glanced back, he was still fixed on me. No movement, no expression, just watching. I tried shaking it off, focusing on the party, giving high fives and cheering for gutter balls and eventually singing happy birthday, but the staring didn't stop. It got so bad that I switched spots and sat with my back to him, but I could still feel his eyes on me. After a while I turned back again. His gaze was still locked on me. Then he crossed the line. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, then he stuck out his tongue. Slow, deliberate, sliding it across his lips. In this gross, sexual way, my stomach lurched. I didn't scream or make a scene, but my hands shook, and I marched straight to the front counter and told the manager, "There's a guy in a hoodie at the tables who has been staring at me nonstop, and he just did something really creepy and inappropriate with his tongue." The manager didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio and called security. A couple minutes later, they walked the guy out of the building. He didn't resist, just shuffled towards the door with his head down, hoodie covering most of his face. The manager apologized, threw in some free tokens for the arcade as a sorry, and said they banned him from coming back. The party wound down around 5 o'clock. I carried the leftover gift bags to my sister's car and then headed over to my car. That's when I saw 2 police cruisers parked right next to my silver Honda. An officer had someone cuffed and bent over one of the cars. When I got closer, I saw that it was the hooded man, the same one who had been thrown out. Another cop walked up after I asked what was going on.
"Ma'am, is this your vehicle?"
I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah, what happened?" He explained that a family leaving spotted him in the lot with a wire hanger, working it into the driver's side door of my car, trying to pop the lock. They shouted at him, but he ignored them, and just kept trying to unlock the car until they rolled up and arrested him a few minutes later. I stared at the fresh scratches around my door handle. The officer asked if I knew him. I said no, but quickly told him about what happened in the bowling alley earlier. They checked his background. He had priors for harassment, loitering, stuff like that. Nothing super violent, but enough to make my legs feel weak. They took my statement, let me go, and I drove home fast. To this day, I still don't know how he knew which car was mine. We pulled in hours earlier and unloaded cake and gifts with the kids and my sister, and nothing stood out to me, but he must have been there, watching from the lot. Maybe he saw me get out of my car when we first showed up and then followed us inside. I never went back to Tampa Lanes, and it wasn't long after that night it closed down for good, and the building has sat empty for years now. I have to drive by that place on my way to and from work, and every time I do, I wonder what could have happened to me if that man had managed to jimmy the lock on my car.
This happened back in 2003, when I was 19 and working as a busboy at Unity Lanes in Zephyrhills, Florida. It was one of those old-school bowling alleys, and is one of the only places Zephyrhills has to offer in the way of entertainment, which was the case back then as well. The night league was always packed with regulars. I got decent tips, and free pool games on the slower shifts. Nothing ever felt dangerous there, just families and drunks having fun. Friday nights would get a little crazy, but the worst that would happen is we had to throw out some white teenager dropping F-bombs and using the N-word. It was a Tuesday night. I was working the late shift. I would say this was around 9 p.m. The place was almost empty because it wasn't a league night. There were just a few lanes with customers. I was wiping down tables, stacking up chairs, when the manager told me to take 5. I grabbed my pack of Marlboros and slipped out the back door to the alley behind the building, where the dumpsters sat against a concrete barrier. The back lot was always dark. There was only a dim light over the door. I lit up and leaned against the wall, taking a long drag. I was sort of zoning out when I heard something rustling inside the dumpster. It wasn't the wind. There was something shifting around in there. I froze. I figured it might be a raccoon or a cat digging for scraps. But I shouted, "Hello?" Nothing. I shrugged it off and took another puff. Then, the lid of the dumpster flew open, and out she came, like a fucking jack-in-the-box. It was what you could loosely call a woman, maybe late 30s, wild hair matted with God knows what, eyes wide, and clothes filthy and torn. She had that emaciated look that crack addicts have, and she was screaming, a high-pitched wail that cut right through me. In her hand, she held a kitchen knife. She charged at me, full sprint, full banshee. The cigarette fell from my mouth. I didn't think, I just reacted, and shoved her hard with both hands, which sent her flying backward. And she fell hard on the asphalt, knife clattered away. I heard her cursing at me as I bolted back inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. "Somebody call the cops, now. Some crazy lady just jumped out of the dumpster with a knife." Bystanders were looking at me like I was nuts, so I repeated myself. "I'm not joking. Some woman came out of the dumpster with a knife, and she just tried to fucking stab me." Cops arrived maybe 10 minutes later, lights flashing. They searched the back lot, but the dumpster was empty, and the woman was nowhere to be found. Lou, the manager, covered the rest of my shift after I was done giving my statement, and sent me home early. I was pretty shaken up about the whole thing. I found out that a couple of hours after the cops were called, they tracked her down a few blocks away, hiding in an abandoned shed in someone's backyard. She was a local repeat offender, drug addict, and had multiple arrests for animal abuse, starving dogs, and much worse. And get this, she attacked someone else a month earlier, slashed a guy in a gas station parking lot over him not giving her money. That one got her on probation, but after this, they revoked it and tacked on an assault with a deadly weapon charge. She ended up with a 5-year prison sentence. I never saw her again, and it was this incident that helped me quit smoking for good. Unity Lanes is still there to this day. It's been rebranded and completely remodeled from when I worked there. For the longest time, this was the only hangout spot for high school kids and 20-something-year-old alcoholics who lived in this town. I got really fed up with the environment of that place, and quit about a year after the dumpster woman incident. The owners apparently got fed up as well, because they started having a police car parked there on Friday nights, and security started kicking out anyone who wasn't there for bowling. I wish that policy was a thing back when I worked there. Anyway, that part of my life is long behind me, but I still get nervous when I'm around dumpsters.
This story is from my hike from Graz, Austria to Venice, Italy. It might not be as frightening as some other stories, but I want to share it. In the summer of 2023, my two friends and I, all 17 years old at the time, were in the final week of our hike from Graz to Venice. It was late at night, and we still hadn't found a place to set up our tents. We were walking along a seemingly endless beach, exhaustion weighing heavily on us after 20 days of walking. Our legs ached from blisters, and we had already taken minutes-long pauses to regain energy. We were all eager to rest. Eventually, we found a suitable spot on the map, a beach further away from the city we were in, and decided to head there. By this time, we had briefly entered the city but hadn't gone deep into it. The streets were empty except for some tourists near the beach. I was so exhausted that I was even walking with my eyes closed. To reach our campsite, we had to take a small gravel path connected to one of the streets. As we arrived at the intersection that led to our intended campsite, a man suddenly emerged from the path we needed to take, which led right into the woods, and walked right past us. My friend, distracted by fatigue, walked past the intersection without noticing it. I quickly called out to him, pointing out that we needed to take that path. Just after I corrected my friend, I don't know why, but I glanced back and noticed the man standing in the middle of the road, motionless, staring at us. For a few seconds I looked at him, but it was pitch black, so I couldn't make out his features. I didn't think much of it and decided to continue walking. However, as soon as we entered the gravel path, we made a chilling discovery. The man was now following us, heading back from where he had just come. As we began to worry, all our exhaustion and pain vanished, along with the weight of our fully packed backpacks. While still walking down this dark path, we started discussing what to do rather loudly, not expecting him to understand our language since we weren't locals. After a brief discussion, we decided that jumping into the field next to the path was a better option than staying on the path or facing the man. So, after about 30 meters of walking along the path, we jumped into the field. The field was full of crops and difficult to wade through, including jumping over some kind of ditch in the middle of the field. But with adrenaline pumping, we barely noticed the discomfort and kept running as fast as we could with these huge backpacks. As soon as the man saw us move, he immediately turned back and returned to the road that we had just left. We quickly did the same, and with a head start, we managed to put some distance between us and him. Our shorts and shoes were wet. However, there was no time to care. The man was still following us. We rushed through the streets of the city, and as soon as we didn't see him anymore, we calmed down a bit. Still, fear kept us moving, trying to stay in the darkness so he couldn't see us. Walking past the gas station at the end of the city, which could be seen from the street where we had met the man, we continued and walked another 5 kilometers before finally setting up our tents, far away from where we had encountered the man. To this day, we have no idea if he was just a drunkard playing a twisted joke, or if he had more sinister intentions. And who knows what might have happened if it hadn't been for those pauses that we took. We might have been right on time to meet this mysterious man further down into the darkness of the woods. I can't breathe. My eyes are open, and I am able to see everything around me. Yes, it's shrouded in darkness, but it's still my room, and I am still in my bed. Except I can't move, and I can't breathe. I can feel the eyes of something sinister on me. Something is watching me from the darkness that is surrounding me. I don't see it. I can smell it. A putrid, stagnant smell, like sulfur, acid, and bowel movement all in one. But I feel it. I feel anger and the hatred in the air around me. The room I fell asleep in was peaceful. It's my room. I can see the Jack Skellington tapestry on the wall across from me. The television is in sleep mode. The little bubbles dancing around the screen. I can feel the weight of my tiny dog beside me under the blanket. My drawings hung where they were when I fell asleep. But the darkness in the room is darker. The feeling in the room is evil. There's a sound. What's that sound? It's not me. I can't breathe, I can't move, and I for sure can't speak. But something is moving. Footsteps. Those are footsteps that I can hear, coming from my closet. I cut my eyes, looking as far to the side of them to try and see who or what. But there's nothing there. Until there's movement at the end of my bed. Looking down, still unable to do anything but stare. There he is, the guy in the top hat. He's tall, all black. He's not a he at all, but a thing. No facial features are eminent, but I can make out a grin spreading across his blank and stoic face. He's enjoying this. The torture and pure terror I feel. I can tell he's feeding off of it. Tightly shutting my eyes, I'm hoping that doing this will make him go away. My eyes fly back open in a panic when I feel breath on my face and neck. There he is, hovering over me, the grin wider than it was before. I tried to make him disappear. He's mouthing something, but no words are audible. And then in a growling whisper, "I watch you sleep at night. So lovely you are. From this night forward until time ends, I will watch you sleep. Time and time again." Praying in my head that he will just go away, I can feel the tears gliding down the sides of my face. I still can't breathe, move, or speak. I am so beyond trapped, and the terror welling inside me needs to be released. I open my mouth, forming a scream, and in my mind, that's all I'm doing, screaming as loud as possible. Finally, the only thing filling the silence and the darkness that surrounds me are my screams. I sit up as quickly as possible and gather myself. Inhale. 1, 2, 3. Exhale. 1, 2, 3. After I had pulled myself together and obtained the courage to go to the bathroom, I head that way. Upon returning to my bed, I grab my phone to check the time, and there, present on the screen, is a picture taken of me from above. My eyes wide and filled with tears that are streaming down my cheeks, mouth open in the form of a scream, and a dark glaze over my eyes. Those don't look like my eyes. I work at a restaurant in a small town, and I have been locking up at the end of the night for a year now. It's nice, easy money, and I usually get paid an extra hour while doing simple tasks like cleaning or rolling silverware. It's actually calming after a hectic night in the kitchen. I never check bathrooms or anything before locking up. Usually the restaurant is empty well before I am finished, and I have a lot of time to myself. There is something so eerie about being in a restaurant alone after closing. What was once a bustling place full of people is now empty and silent. The sounds of the machinery kicking on can be heard across the restaurant. The sound of the ice machine dumping ice usually makes me jump. With the layout of the restaurant, the main light switches are on the opposite side of the restaurant from the door with the alarm. So I usually lock the back and front doors and then turn off all the lights. Then I make my way through the dark restaurant to the side door, which has the keypad. In order to arm the system, all doors need to be closed and there needs to be no movement in the restaurant. If there is an error, it will tell me the door that is open, or infrared, and the area where there is movement. When I first started locking up, I needed the flashlight on my phone to navigate to the door. But now I know the layout, so I just walk in the darkness. For some reason, it is less scary to just speed walk through the dark than to have a dimly lit phone light casting shadows and reflecting off surfaces. I hate to say it as a grown man. The dark creeps me out. Tonight, the restaurant had been closed for almost 2 hours. I mopped the kitchen, cleaned a bit, and rolled some silverware for the morning crew. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, then made my way through the dark restaurant to the door. I typed in the code and got an error. Error, infrared detected. Dining room. I felt my stomach sink. I know I've been alone in this restaurant for 2 hours. I know I had just walked through that pitch-black dining room. Just then I heard footsteps pounding on the tile coming towards me from the dining room. I have gotten chills down my spine before when something creeps me out, but this was different. It felt like my entire nervous system was overloaded. I didn't even turn around, I just opened the door and bolted out into the parking lot. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me. I got in my car and peeled out. I drove down the street and called 911, and then my boss. I waited until they arrived before I went back into the restaurant. The door was wide open. There was no sign of anyone. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. I gave a report of what happened, and that was it. The only interior camera that is pointed at the cash registers didn't see into a majority of the dining room, but the exterior camera caught something that scared the life out of me, and that I will think about for the rest of my life. It captures me running out of the building and around the corner to my car. Shortly after I exited, you could barely see the elongated shadow of someone standing by the door beneath the camera, watching me run away. The person casting it being just out of frame, before turning the opposite direction and disappearing. Just seeing my terrified self running away and that shadow watching me do so, I have never felt so vulnerable. I'm not really a believer in the paranormal, but I just don't know what kind of sick person would wait in a restaurant for 2 hours after close, not steal anything, just to scare the employee that was locking up. I know for a fact it wasn't any of my coworkers. Obviously, there wasn't much that could be done to find out who it was. Nothing shows anyone entering the building after close, and from what we could tell, everyone who entered that day had left. This event still has me questioning myself on whether it was a sick prank, someone mentally ill, or something supernatural. In my late teens, early 20s, I was a venture scout and leader for trips my local Boy Scout troop went on. I'm a female, but my brother was part of the troop for years, and I became friends with everyone in the troop. I completed my youth protection training and was allowed to become a leader/chaperone on camping trips and other wilderness-related outings. I had a longtime friend in the troop. Let's call him Sam, and he was a close friend of my whole family. Sam was a little older than me and had already been a Boy Scout leader for several years at this point. This story takes place in November of 2018. Sam and I were made the leaders of an upcoming camping trip, the annual fall canoe float down the Buffalo National River in Arkansas. The Buffalo River runs about 135 miles through the Ozark Mountains, with enormous bluffs on at least one side or the other through most of it. It flows through some of the most beautiful parts of Northwest and Northern Arkansas, and despite my incident, I still encourage you to take a trip there. We had made camp that afternoon on a riverbank after about 15 miles from where we put it in. The scouts put up their tents about 25 yards upstream of my tent, with the campfire and cooking station situated in between us. As I was setting up, I mentioned to Sam that I was a little nervous about sleeping in my tent alone for the first time. He shrugged me off and told me it would be fine, that sleeping alone was actually quite peaceful. I remember rolling my eyes because, unlike me, Sam had not only been camping completely alone for years, he had also done it in a hammock with no other what I consider protective gear. I didn't bother to ask him to tent with me because, according to the scouting rules, males and females cannot share tents, and I didn't want to get in trouble the very first time I was leading the troop. However, I think Sam sensed my unease, and he set up his sleeping arrangements outside my tent, which consisted of a sleeping pad on the ground with his canoe flipped over on top of him, like a coffin. To this day, I admire what it must have been like to live with so little concern. We all spent the evening around the campfire, talking and making dinner. The forest and the river all around us was so full of life that I felt a little more comfortable when we all decided to turn in for the night. I watched Sam lay down on his pad and flip the canoe over on top of him, before sighing with contentment, and I climbed into my tent. I spent the first hour or two reading while listening to the sounds of the boys up the riverbank fade as they all started to fall asleep. But I couldn't. The nighttime temperature had dropped below freezing. Then, of course, I needed to pee. I spent probably another 10 minutes trying to trick myself into forgetting about it and fall asleep, but it was impossible. Finally, I got out of my tent, tapped Sam's canoe to let him know where I was going, and then headed up the bank for some privacy. I don't know how many women on here have peed in the woods, but if you have, you'll know it's one of the worst things about camping. What made it even worse is because I was cautious about being seen. I climbed all the way up the embankment and walked about 10 feet into the woods before stopping. And oh my gosh, it was miserable. Not only having to drop drawer in the freezing cold, but also being completely vulnerable. But the worst part about it was the woods were completely silent. Not a cricket, not a rustle of a squirrel. Nothing. It didn't click in my head until years later about how bad that actually is. Just the primitive part of my brain started screaming to leave immediately. I ran back to the embankment before sliding down onto my butt and sprinting back to camp. Once back around everyone else, and in the glow of the full moon, I had a little more sense of security. The river was burbling on quietly, and I could see the dying embers of the campfire before getting the idea to take the warm rocks from the campfire and put them in my sleeping bag to try to get enough warmth to sleep. I drug about 4 or 5 decent-sized stones into my tent and slipped them into the bottom of my sleeping bag. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. I was awake for hours in pain from how cold I was, trying to rub the ache out of my legs. I remember actually tearing up a bit with how exhausted and cold I was. That's when I heard a noise, like footsteps walking around downstream from my tent. The bank was covered in smooth river stones, so any kind of footsteps would make noise. But the sound of the rocks shifting told me that this was something large. Then I heard them enter the water, and I worried one of the boys was awake and going for a midnight swim. I quickly unzipped my tent and poked my head out to see an elk drinking from the river. At least it looked like an elk. It was massive, but it was far enough away and standing perfectly in shadow that I wasn't quite sure. It was much too big to be a deer, but we don't have moose in Arkansas. I quietly watched it, hoping to see more of it, when it looked directly at me. Its face, even in the shadow, triggered my primitive brain again. If my blood wasn't running cold before, it was now. I felt this prickling up my neck as this unknown terror crept into my bones. I ducked my head back into my tent and stayed completely still. For hours. The combination of fear and the cold wasted any hope of sleeping. I never heard the elk thing leave the bank, but I also didn't even think about listening for it. The woods were that almost screaming silence again. After what felt like hours, someone tapped on my tent and said, "Come on out, it's time to go." I pressed my face into my hands and breathed this sigh of both relief and exhaustion. I had made it through the night, and even though I didn't get any sleep, it was over. I quickly stuck my feet in my boots and stepped out of my tent to find nothing. It was still night. I had confused the light from the moon as dawn. No one was around my tent, and the time it took from when they spoke to me to when I came out was not enough time for one of the boys to make it back to their tent before I saw them. That pricking feeling came back, but this time it was all over my body as I heard a voice in my head say, "Don't turn around." I slowly sat backwards in my tent and zipped myself up into it with shaking hands. I laid down in my sleeping bag and covered my face and prayed. I prayed for so long until I finally fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to the familiar voice of Sam talking to another scout outside my tent. I could feel the warmth of the sun beating down into my tent. I know I looked terrible by the way Sam did a double take upon seeing me. "Oh, geez, you look like you didn't sleep at all." "Did you come to my tent last night?" I asked him. Sam, still studying my face, slowly responded, "No." "Please don't play with me. If you did, you got me good. Great. Just don't continue the joke right now if you did, please." I felt a little bad being accusatory, because Sam was actually a pretty no-nonsense guy, especially when it came to being in charge on camping trips. "Diana, no. I wouldn't try to scare you. I know how nervous you were about sleeping alone out here." He folded up his pad before tossing it into his canoe and throwing it over his shoulder. "But I guess you were too scared last night." I looked confused. "What?" Sam gestured up the embankment into the woods. "I heard you make a few trips up there. Next time just get a Gatorade bottle and you won't have to leave your tent." Around that time, the rest of the scouts had announced that they had finished cooking breakfast, and everyone migrated to the campfire. But I felt like I had just sunk down to my knees in the river mud. I had left the tent once. I went up the embankment and came back down once. So if it wasn't me, what had Sam heard coming out of the woods and checking out my tent multiple times that night? Why hadn't I heard it? I have told this story to people before, and they say I had just dreamed it, but I know that I hadn't. I had been too cold and had sat up in my sleeping bag most of the night, rubbing my legs. And since I know it wasn't a dream, what is hiding and hunting in the woods along the Buffalo River? In my late teens, early 20s, I was a venture scout and leader for trips my local Boy Scout troop went on. I'm a female, but my brother was part of the troop for years, and I became friends with everyone in the troop. I completed my youth protection training and was allowed to become a leader/chaperone on camping trips and other wilderness-related outings. I had a longtime friend in the troop. Let's call him Sam, and he was a close friend of my whole family. Sam was a little older than me and had already been a Boy Scout leader for several years at this point. This story takes place in November of 2018. Sam and I were made the leaders of an upcoming camping trip, the annual fall canoe float down the Buffalo National River in Arkansas. The Buffalo River runs about 135 miles through the Ozark Mountains, with enormous bluffs on at least one side or the other through most of it. It flows through some of the most beautiful parts of northwest and northern Arkansas, and despite my incident, I still encourage you to take a trip there. We had made camp that afternoon on a riverbank after about 15 miles from where we put it in. The scouts put up their tent about 25 yards upstream of my tent, with the campfire and cooking station situated in between us. As I was setting up, I mentioned to Sam that I was a little nervous about sleeping in my tent alone for the first time. He shrugged me off and told me it would be fine, that sleeping alone was actually quite peaceful. I remember rolling my eyes because, unlike me, Sam had not only been camping completely alone for years, he had also done it in a hammock with no other what I consider protective gear. I didn't bother to ask him to tent with me because, according to the scouting rules, males and females cannot share tents, and I didn't want to get in trouble the very first time I was leading the troop. However, I think Sam sensed my unease, and he set up his sleeping arrangements outside my tent, which consisted of a sleeping pad on the ground with his canoe flipped over on top of him, like a coffin. To this day, I admire what it must have been like to live with so little concern. We all spent the evening around the campfire, talking and making dinner. The forest and the river all around us was so full of life that I felt a little more comfortable when we all decided to turn in for the night. I watched Sam lay down on his pad and flip the canoe over on top of him, before sighing with contentment, and I climbed into my tent. I spent the first hour or two reading, while listening to the sounds of the boys up the riverbank fade as they all started to fall asleep. But I couldn't. The nighttime temperature had dropped below freezing. Then, of course, I needed to pee. I spent probably another 10 minutes trying to trick myself into forgetting about it and fall asleep, but it was impossible. Finally, I got out of my tent, tapped Sam's canoe to let him know where I was going, and then headed up the bank for some privacy. I don't know how many women on here have peed in the woods, but if you have, you'll know it's one of the worst things about camping. What made it even worse is because I was cautious about being seen. I climbed all the way up the embankment and walked about 10 feet into the woods before stopping. And oh my gosh, it was miserable. Not only having to drop drawer in the freezing cold, but also being completely vulnerable. But the worst part about it was the woods were completely silent. Not a cricket, not a rustle of a squirrel. Nothing. It didn't click in my head until years later about how bad that actually is. Just the primitive part of my brain started screaming to leave immediately. I ran back to the embankment before sliding down onto my butt and sprinting back to camp. Once back around everyone else, and in the glow of the full moon, I had a little more sense of security. The river was burbling on quietly, and I could see the dying embers of the campfire before getting the idea to take the warm rocks from the campfire and put them in my sleeping bag to try to get enough warmth to sleep. I drug about 4 or 5 decent-sized stones into my tent and slipped them into the bottom of my sleeping bag. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. I was awake for hours in pain from how cold I was, trying to rub the ache out of my legs. I remember actually tearing up a bit with how exhausted and cold I was. That's when I heard a noise, like footsteps walking around downstream from my tent. The bank was covered in smooth river stones, so any kind of footsteps would make noise. But the sound of the rocks shifting told me that this was something large. Then I heard them enter the water, and I worried one of the boys was awake and going for a midnight swim. I quickly unzipped my tent and poked my head out to see an elk drinking from the river. At least it looked like an elk. It was massive, but it was far enough away and standing perfectly in shadow that I wasn't quite sure. It was much too big to be a deer, but we don't have moose in Arkansas. I quietly watched it, hoping to see more of it, when it looked directly at me. Its face, even in the shadow, triggered my primitive brain again. If my blood wasn't running cold before, it was now. I felt this prickling up my neck as this unknown terror crept into my bones. I ducked my head back into my tent and stayed completely still for hours. The combination of fear and the cold wasted any hope of sleeping. I never heard the elk thing leave the bank, but I also didn't even think about listening for it. The woods were that almost screaming silence again. After what felt like hours, someone tapped on my tent and said, "Come on out, it's time to go." I pressed my face into my hands and breathed this sigh of both relief and exhaustion. I had made it through the night, and even though I didn't get any sleep, it was over. I quickly stuck my feet in my boots and stepped out of my tent to find nothing. It was still night. I had confused the light from the moon as dawn. No one was around my tent, and the time it took from when they spoke to me to when I came out was not enough time for one of the boys to make it back to their tent before I saw them. That pricking feeling came back, but this time it was all over my body as I heard a voice in my head say, "Don't turn around." I slowly sat backwards in my tent and zipped myself up into it with shaking hands. I laid down in my sleeping bag and covered my face and prayed. I prayed for so long until I finally fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to the familiar voice of Sam talking to another scout outside my tent. I could feel the warmth of the sun beating down into my tent. I know I looked terrible by the way Sam did a double take upon seeing me. "Oh, geez, you look like you didn't sleep at all." "Did you come to my tent last night?" I asked him. Sam, still studying my face, slowly responded, "No." "Please don't play with me. If you did, you got me good. Great. Just don't continue the joke right now if you did, please." I felt a little bad being accusatory, because Sam was actually a pretty no-nonsense guy, especially when it came to being in charge on camping trips. "Diana, no. I wouldn't try to scare you. I know how nervous you were about sleeping alone out here." He folded up his pad before tossing it into his canoe and throwing it over his shoulder. "But I guess you were too scared last night." I looked confused. "What?" Sam gestured up the embankment into the woods. "I heard you make a few trips up there. Next time just get a Gatorade bottle and you won't have to leave your tent." Around that time, the rest of the scouts had announced that they had finished cooking breakfast, and everyone migrated to the campfire. But I felt like I had just sunk down to my knees in the river mud. I had left the tent once. I went up the embankment and came back down once. So if it wasn't me, what had Sam heard coming out of the woods and checking out my tent multiple times that night? Why hadn't I heard it? I have told this story to people before, and they say I had just dreamed it, but I know that I hadn't. I had been too cold and had sat up in my sleeping bag most of the night, rubbing my legs. And since I know it wasn't a dream, what is hiding and hunting in the woods along the Buffalo River?